Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. It was the night before school started, mid-August, and I couldn't sleep. I was 16 that summer, stuck in that weird in-between where you're technically still a kid, but feel too old to be one. My mom had already gone to bed, and my little brother Jude had passed out with his headphones on, probably watching some Minecraft thing on YouTube. It was hot, still above 80 even after dark, and I didn't have AC in my room, just a fan that mostly just pushed warm air around. I got up around 11:30 and went out to the backyard to cool off. We live in a cul-de-sac on the edge of town, not quite rural, but not busy either. Our backyard runs up against a little wooded area that used to be part of some farm or something. You can't really walk through it. It's all brambles and trash and broken fencing, but it makes the house feel more private. I sat on the old trampoline and laid back, phone in my hand, scrolling through nothing. Just aimless. The sky was super clear. No moon, barely any clouds, and the stars were kind of amazing. Way more than I usually noticed. We're just far enough from the city that you can really see them on dry nights like that. I took a photo. Not for any reason, just one of those idle things you do. I didn't even look at it afterward. Just snapped it and put the phone back on my stomach. I laid there for probably 20 minutes, zoning out, listening to the buzz of the cicadas and the occasional car going by somewhere off in the distance. That was when I noticed the quiet. It wasn't like everything suddenly went silent. It was more like I gradually realized there was less noise than there should have been. No bugs, no rustling, just the fan through my window humming behind the screen. I sat up a little and listened harder. Nothing. Even the crickets had stopped. I stayed still. It felt wrong. Not dramatic, just off. Like the whole backyard was holding its breath. Then I noticed something in the sky. It wasn't moving. It wasn't glowing. It didn't look like anything at all. It was just black. A patch of sky that didn't match the rest of it. Like someone had cut out a star-shaped piece of black paper and taped it over the night. I thought it was a cloud at first, but it wasn't shaped like one. It was sharper, clean-edged, and the air was dead still. No breeze, no movement. I kept watching it, expecting it to drift or change shape, but it didn't. It just was. I stood up on the trampoline to get a better look, and as I did, the security light on the neighbor's garage flicked on. I flinched like I'd done something wrong, but there was nothing out there. Nothing moving. When I looked back at the sky, the shape was gone. Just stars. I stayed out there another minute or two, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. I even walked to the far end of the yard, near the broken fence, to get a better view past the trees, but everything looked normal. I went back inside, locked the door, turned on the kitchen light, and stood there feeling kind of stupid. I didn't know what I'd even seen, or if I'd seen anything. I told myself it was probably a cloud after all. I didn't remember the photo until the next morning. It was just there in my camera roll between a blurry shot of my brother making a face at dinner and a screenshot of my schedule. At first glance, it looked normal. Grainy stars, dark sky, typical phone photo at night. But in the upper right corner, something was wrong. There was a shape, a solid black chunk cutting into the stars. Not a smudge or a shadow, just this perfect empty wedge, like a slice of the sky had been erased. No texture, no blur, just absence. I zoomed in, hoping it was maybe my finger or the edge of the lens, but it wasn't. It wasn't shaped like anything familiar. It didn't match the framing of the photo either. It angled upward, not across. It didn't line up with anything in the yard, and it didn't look like a bird or a plane or a tree branch. I took screenshots. I showed it to Jude and told him I didn't remember seeing anything like that in the sky when I took it. He shrugged and said it was probably a glitch or a smudge or something. I could tell he wasn't really interested, but I knew I hadn't seen that when I looked up. Later that day, I went back out to the trampoline to try to recreate it. I took another photo from the same angle around the same time of night, and nothing was there. Stars looked the same, trees were the same, but no shape. I cleaned the lens, tried again. Nothing. I I did this for 4 nights in a row, just waiting, watching the sky. Nothing ever happened. It was just me and the bugs and the occasional neighbor dog barking. I even went out at 11:30 exactly, laid down the same way, took a dozen photos in a row. Not one had anything strange. But the one from that night still has the shape. I never showed it to my mom. She doesn't really care about phone stuff, and I didn't feel like trying to explain it without sounding like a freak. I didn't even post it anywhere. I didn't want people asking questions I couldn't answer. I kept thinking maybe it was something explainable. A plane passing without lights. A bug close to the lens. Something on the sensor. But it doesn't look like that. It looks like something blocked the stars. Like something was just there, hanging over the yard, too quiet to notice. I deleted the original photo by accident a few months later when I cleared out storage on my phone. I still have the screenshot though. It's in an album called with a bunch of other weird stuff I find online. Sometimes I open it and just stare at the shape, trying to remember if I really didn't see it when I looked up. I still don't know how something could be that big and that quiet without me hearing or feeling it. But I didn't. I just took the photo, looked at the stars, and laid there, completely unaware that something was watching from above. I went solo hiking near Lake Crescent in Washington last October. Not deep into the backcountry or anything, just far enough off the main trail to feel like I was alone. I had the Friday off, packed light, and planned to camp overnight and head back in the morning. Nothing dramatic, just some quiet, maybe a few photos if the fog was nice. The weather was exactly how I hoped. Cold, damp, and quiet. Not raining, just that constant mist that sticks to your jacket and makes everything smell like pine and wet earth. I pitched my tent near a little rise overlooking the lake, close enough to hear the water lapping if the wind shifted, but far enough that I wouldn't accidentally roll into it if I slept weird. I got the tent up around 6 p.m. and made a quick dinner, ramen and a granola bar. No fire, since I didn't want to deal with permits or ashes. By 8, it was already dark enough that I turned in. I remember zipping up my bag, pulling my knit cap down over my ears, and listening for a while. It was quiet, just the usual woods sounds, a distant owl, maybe a Mouther people on the trail the whole day, and I hadn't seen another car at the trailhead. It felt empty in a good way. At some point during the night, I woke up. I thought it was because I had to pee, but I checked my phone 2:47 a.m. and just lay there. I didn't feel cold or uncomfortable, just alert. Not scared exactly, but very aware of how thin the tent fabric was. I stayed still for a long time, trying to figure out if I'd heard something or if my body just decided to be awake. There weren't any loud noises, no branches snapping or animals moving around, just this heavy, unnatural stillness. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. When I got up in the morning, everything looked normal at first. Dew on the fly, fog sitting low in the trees. I opened the flap and stepped outside, stretching my legs and doing that half-awake zombie walk around the tent. That's when I saw them, footprints in the soft ground, leading away from my tent in a straight line. I crouched down and looked closer. They were mine. Same tread as my hiking boots, same stride length, but they weren't from the day before. I would have seen them when I set up camp. These were fresh. You could still see the sharp edges where the soil compressed. They went about 100 feet, then turned around and came straight back, right to the tent. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. The prints were clear, and there weren't any others around them. No animal tracks, no sign of anyone else. Just a straight path out and back, perfectly aligned. I kept trying to explain it away. Sleepwalking? But I'd never done that before. And I sleep in a mummy bag that I zip all the way up. It's not something you casually wriggle out of without waking up. And I know I didn't unzip the tent. I'm one of those paranoid campers who double checks the zippers every time. The door was still shut that morning, fully zipped from the inside. Still, I went over the whole site, checked my pack, my gear, looked for signs of anything disturbed. Nothing was missing. Nothing moved. My food bag was still hung where I'd left it, untouched. I followed the prints out to the point where they stopped. It was near a cluster of trees, just before the slope dipped toward the lake. The last pair of footprints turned around cleanly, like whoever made them had just reached a spot, paused, and walked back. There was no circling, no wandering, just out and back. I stood there at the turnaround spot, trying to remember anything. Any dream, any moment of waking, anything that might explain it. But there was nothing, just silence and fog. I hiked out by noon, quicker than I normally would. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone coming up the trail behind me. I didn't see anyone, but a few times I thought I heard branches shifting deeper in the woods. Not snapping, not footsteps, just movement, the kind that doesn't line up with wind. Back at the trailhead, my car was the only one there. I checked the doors and trunk just in case, even though I had the keys in my jacket pocket the whole time. Everything was fine. I started driving and didn't stop until I was back on the main highway. Later that night, I went through the photos on my phone. Just the usual, trees, water, a blurry shot of a crow that startled me by landing too close. But I noticed one that didn't make sense. It was a black frame, almost entirely dark. You could barely make out some faint light in the top corner, like a distant glow through branches. The timestamp said 3:04 a.m. My phone had been in my bag, zipped inside the tent. I never took it out that night. I don't remember taking that photo. I don't remember leaving the tent. But those footprints said I did. I was driving west on Route 62 toward Joshua Tree, sometime around midnight, middle of August last year. I remember that because it was the night after my sister's wedding in Phoenix, and I needed a break from all the family chaos. I'd booked a tiny rental cabin outside of 29 Palms, just a few days to myself. No plans except to read, walk around the park, and maybe try some long exposure shots of the stars. I had my camera gear in the back seat and a half-eaten gas station burrito on the passenger side. It was a dry heat even after dark, about 85 degrees, and my windows were cracked just enough to let the smell of dust and creosote roll through. There wasn't much traffic. One car passed me in the opposite direction maybe every 15 minutes. The radio kept cutting out, so I switched it off and just drove in silence. About an hour east of 29 Palms, I saw a light in the sky. It was off to my left, sort of hovering low above the horizon. At first, I assumed it was a plane heading toward Palm Springs or maybe Edwards Air Force Base. But it didn't blink or move, just a solid white light. I glanced at it, then back at the road and didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, I looked again, and it was still there. Same height, same brightness. Still not blinking. I started watching it more closely after that. I'd glance every few minutes, expecting it to veer off or vanish behind a hill or something. But it didn't. The weird part wasn't that it was following me exactly. It wasn't hovering right above me or anything like that. It just kept pace. Off to my left, always in about the same position relative to my car. Like if you held your thumb out at arm's length and walked in a straight line, and the thumb stayed exactly in the same spot on the horizon, no matter how far you walked. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a communication tower way off in the distance, and the angle just made it seem like it was moving. But I passed several ridges and curves in the road, and the light never dipped or shifted. It wasn't tied to the landscape. I pulled over at one point, somewhere near Ironage Road. There's nothing out there, just empty desert and Joshua trees. I shut off the engine and got out. It was dead quiet except for the wind brushing against the scrub. The stars were bright, no moon, and the light was still there, hovering in that same spot, maybe 30 degrees above the horizon. I stood by the car for a few minutes, watching. It didn't flicker. It didn't change shape. It just hung there. I even tried taking a photo with my phone, but nothing showed up. That part wasn't super weird. Phone cameras don't pick up faint stars sometimes, but it bothered me more than it should have. It looked so solid and sharp with my eyes, like a headlight aimed right at me from across the sky. But the screen stayed black. After a while, I got back in the car and kept driving. That light stayed with me the whole time. 2 hours, give or take. It never got closer, never pulled back, never moved off center. It just floated there, as if it was tethered to me somehow, but far away. And the longer it stayed, the more I started noticing little things, like how my GPS kept freezing for a few seconds at a time, or how the dash clock would blink out and reset when I hit certain mile markers. That could have been the heat or a loose wire, sure, but it happened more than once and always while the light was visible out the driver's window. The other thing was the silence. The desert is always quiet. Yeah, but this was different. No wind, no insects, no distant cars. Just my tires humming on the road and the faint buzz of the air vents. When I cracked the window again, I didn't hear anything except the sound of my own breathing. I tried calling my friend Claire once I got closer to town. She's from the area and knows a lot about planes and stargazing stuff, but the call dropped immediately. I had 3 bars. Tried again, same thing, so I gave up. By the time I reached the turnoff to the cabin, the light had finally moved. It didn't fade out or shoot away. It just slowly drifted left toward the horizon until I couldn't see it anymore behind a ridge. I parked outside the cabin, sat in the car for a minute, and looked back up. Nothing. Just stars. The next morning I drove into town to pick up some groceries, and I asked the cashier at the gas station if there were any weather balloons or military flights that had gone out the night before. He just kind of laughed and said, "You saw something weird out there, huh?" I didn't press it. Back at the cabin, I set up my telescope around 10 p.m., hoping maybe I'd spot it again. The stars were clear, and I saw a few satellites move across the sky. Fast, steady, blinking like they're supposed to, but nothing like that other light. Then, just before midnight, I saw it again. This time it was almost directly overhead, just a single, solid, white dot. No blinking, no movement. It looked exactly the same as before, but now it was vertical instead of off to the side. I pointed the telescope at it, dialed in the focus, and it wasn't there. Like I could see everything else around it, stars, even faint satellites, but that specific point, nothing. Just blackness through the scope. I looked with my naked eye again, and there it was, plain as day. I tried adjusting the focus, zooming in and out. Nothing helped. Every time I looked through the eyepiece, the light was gone. I'd look up, it was there. Look through the scope, gone. I even tried photographing it with my DSLR, long exposure. It didn't show up in any of the frames. Then came the weirdest part. While I was watching it, the light blinked off. Not faded, just disappeared. Exactly 23 seconds later, it blinked back on. Then off again, 23 seconds later. I counted 4 cycles. On, off, on, off. Perfectly timed. I didn't stay out much longer after that. Something about that rhythm felt too intentional. The light was gone by the time I woke up. I never saw it again after that trip. No idea what it was. I've tried looking up known satellites or weather patterns, but nothing matches. It never made a sound, never moved aggressively or did anything flashy. Just followed me in perfect silence for hours, then blinked like a signal I wasn't meant to understand. I was driving back from my brother's place in Tampa. It was late, around 11:45 at night, and I'd only stayed that long because he kept pouring more bourbon and talking about some show he was into. I told him I was fine to drive, which I was. I'd only had 1 drink in the first hour, and besides, the roads were dry and empty, and I'd driven that route 100 times. I took I-275 south, then cut over toward St. Pete on Gandy. Nothing special. Traffic was thin, mostly quiet. My dog, Booker, was in the backseat of the Tacoma, passed out in his little travel bed. He always conked out as soon as we hit 50 miles per hour. The dash cam I have is this little Garmin model. Not top of the line, but decent. I keep it running because I do a lot of deliveries during the week, and there have been enough close calls that I'd rather have footage than try to argue with somebody's insurance. I remember passing the bridge, that long, lit-up stretch over the bay. The lights there are bright, almost too bright, but it's better than pitch-dark water on both sides. I had a podcast on. Something true crime, I think. Then the road ahead dipped down slightly near that weird, half-abandoned rest stop, and everything went off. It didn't go dark, not at first. The street lights were still on, and the white lines on the road were clear. But something shifted. I noticed the silence first. The podcast cut out. I figured it was my phone disconnecting from Bluetooth. Happens sometimes when I hit dead zones. But then I realized the engine sounded different. Muted. Like I was driving underwater. I glanced at the speedometer, still around 62. RPM's normal. No lights on the dash. I turned the volume knob on the console, nothing changed. Then everything went black. I don't mean outside, I mean the whole windshield. Total black. No transition. Just 1 second I was driving under lights, and the next it was like someone had thrown a tarp over the truck. I tapped the brakes, but didn't slam them. I didn't want someone behind me rear-ending me if it was just my headlights that cut out. But that wasn't it. The headlights were still on, according to the dash. It just didn't show anything. No road, no signs, no other cars. It lasted maybe 4 or 5 seconds. I counted out loud, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, trying to stay calm. I didn't steer or move the wheel. The truck didn't shake or bump like it had gone off-road. I kept waiting to see the glow of another set of headlights or a mile marker. Then, just like that, everything came back. Lights, road, sound. The podcast was still off, but I could hear the engine again and the rush of wind through the slightly cracked window. Booker stood up in the back seat and started whining. He doesn't usually do that unless he needs to pee. I reached back to scratch behind his ears, told him we were almost home. My heart was going pretty hard. I glanced at the clock on the dash, 12:04. That caught me off guard. The bridge hadn't taken that long to cross. I looked at my watch. It said 11:59. I pulled off at the next gas station, some old Sunoco with flickering overheads and no other cars in the lot. I checked the phone, 12:05. My watch was 5 minutes behind. It's a cheap Casio, yeah, but it never does that. It's not a smartwatch or anything fancy, but I'd synced it earlier that day before heading out. It doesn't drift like that. Booker jumped out and immediately started sniffing the grass near the dumpster, then barked once toward the tree line. I didn't see anything, just some oaks and palmettos past the edge of the lot. I got back in the truck, heart still doing that fluttery thing like I'd almost crashed, and decided I'd check the dash cam footage when I got home. I figured maybe the camera would show what happened, or if I'd swerved, or I don't know. Maybe it would show something I hadn't seen. I got home, parked in the driveway, walked Booker, poured a glass of water, and sat down at my computer with the dash cam card. I scrubbed through the footage. Everything looked normal. Me leaving my brother's place, the route through the neighborhoods, the highway ramp, the bridge. Then there's a part where I can hear myself humming along with the podcast music right as I pass the rest stop. The date and timestamp on the corner jumps straight from 11:56:43 to 12:155. No fade out, no transition. Just 5 minutes missing. And the screen goes completely black for about 5 seconds. It's not corrupted, it's not static, it's pure black. No sound, no motion blur, no dashboard reflection, just a solid black rectangle like the lens cap was on, except I was driving. Then it cuts back in, and I'm still on the road, humming again, like I didn't notice anything. Except I know I did. I remember counting the seconds out loud. That part's not in the audio. It jumps from me humming to me clearing my throat. I sat there in my kitchen for a while, watching that stretch of footage over and over. I looked at the GPS data embedded in the file. The route is continuous. The coordinates make sense. Just a straight shot across Gandhi. I uploaded the video to a private folder and sent a copy to my brother. He called me 2 hours later and just said, "What the hell is this?" I didn't have an answer. I checked the truck in the morning. No signs of damage, no dirt or debris. Tires were fine. Booker wouldn't get in the back seat at first. He just circled it, sniffing the wheel wells. Eventually, I coaxed him up with a treat, but he kept staring out the rear window the whole drive to the store, ears flat. That stretch of road still feels weird. I've driven it twice since then, once during the day, once at night. Nothing strange happened either time. But both times, when I passed the rest stop, I got this tight feeling in my chest, like I was waiting to hit something I couldn't see. And I've noticed my watch runs 5 minutes slow now. No matter how many times I reset it, it syncs, it holds for a day or two, then drifts back again. Always to 5 minutes behind. I bought a new one last week, different brand, digital, same thing. After a day and a half, it shifted, 5 minutes slow. It was just past 2 a.m. when everything went off. I mean everything. Every single streetlight in Millersville shut off all at once. The whole town went dark like a power outage, but only for about 10 seconds. That's what I figured at first. I was driving home from a late shift at the diner, and I just turned onto Pine Street when the lights died. 1 second, there were these dull orange halos stretching down the road. The next, nothing but pitch black, no glow from the lamps, no headlights reflecting off the pavement. The sky was still clear, no clouds, but the street was suddenly swallowed up by darkness. It was weird enough to make me slam on the brakes, and then, just as suddenly as they went out, the lights flickered back on. 10 seconds tops, maybe less. The thing is, I wasn't the only one who noticed. By the time I pulled into my driveway on Elm Avenue, I was already hearing the murmurs. People calling each other on phones, neighbors stepping outside their houses. There was this low, deep hum that lots of folks said they heard coming from the sky during those seconds the lights were out. It wasn't like a drone or a generator, nothing mechanical. It was, I don't know, almost like a vibration in your chest, but quieter. Sort of a deep, pulsing tone that you felt more than heard. I didn't catch it driving, since the truck was running and the engine noise probably drowned it out. But once I shut the door and went inside, my wife Lana told me about it. She said she was awake, looking out the kitchen window, and heard the humming right when the streetlights died. She described it as like the whole sky was vibrating softly. Our dog, Rufus, started barking around the same time. Usually he's quiet at night, but that night he was restless, pacing near the front door like something was out there. Lana and I both looked, but we didn't see anything unusual. No lights in the sky, no strange shadows, just the usual stars. I tried to shrug it off, but by morning, the story was everywhere. At the diner where I work, several customers said they'd heard the same humming. Old Mrs. Keaton, who lives by the water tower, swore the streetlights blinked off just as she was walking her terrier, Clover, down Main Street. Her description of the hum was exactly what Lana said. Tommy, who runs the gas station, claimed he saw the whole town go black through his surveillance cameras, but when he checked the power grid, there wasn't a single outage reported. That's what really got me. There was no explanation. Later, I spoke to Officer Daniels, who'd been on patrol that night. He said he'd noticed the streetlights shut off too, and the humming made his radio crackle for a few seconds. His car's electronics went haywire, but the patrol car didn't lose power or anything. The strangest part? His dash cam recorded the blackout, but the footage showed total darkness for those 10 seconds. No headlights or anything, even though the patrol car was moving on a well-lit street. That didn't make sense. The street is usually bright enough that even a camera without night vision picks up details, but the video was just pure black. A few other residents shared similar experiences. One said their wristwatch stopped for exactly 10 seconds during the blackout, then started again as if nothing had happened. Another told me their phone's clock was 5 minutes behind after the incident. At first, I thought maybe a weird solar flare or some glitch in the town's power grid caused it all, but the local utility company was quick to say there were no issues on their end. The power never dipped or surged, and the transformers checked out fine. The more people talked about it, the more unsettling it got. I went outside that night around 2 a.m. to see if I could catch anything myself. It was quiet, a little chilly for late August. The moon was low, casting soft light over the streets. I sat on the porch with Rufus beside me, waiting. When 2:14 rolled around, the streetlights blinked off again. Just for a second this time. Not the full 10, but enough to plunge the block into darkness. I didn't hear the hum this time, or at least not clearly. But Rufus was alert, ears perked up, his whole body stiff as he stared toward the sky. After the lights came back, I noticed the air smelled different. Hard to explain, but it was faint, like ozone mixed with something metallic. I spent the next few days trying to spot any patterns. The blackout and humming only happened once, always at 2:14 a.m. Nobody saw anything moving in the sky, no aircraft or satellites. A few people swore they saw faint flickering lights way up in the stars during those moments, but when I looked, all I could see were the usual constellations. I called my old friend Sarah, a physics teacher at the high school. I told her what people were reporting, the blackout, the hum, the clock glitches. She said it sounded like an electromagnetic disturbance, but nothing she knew could do that kind of targeted blackout without messing up more electronics or causing power failures. What bugged me most was how isolated it felt. The rest of the county didn't notice a thing. No blackouts, no hums, no strange clock shifts, just Millersville. The whole town was basically trapped in this weird bubble for 10 seconds at the same time every night. No one could explain why. I haven't heard anything about it happening again since those few nights, but sometimes I catch Rufus staring at the sky, ears tilted like he's waiting for it to start again. And me, I'm still not sure what to make of it. It wasn't some flashy UFO or weird glowing object, just a blackout and a hum and a feeling that something was out there watching us, or maybe waiting. I was cruising at 38,000 feet over northern Nevada when it happened. Clear night, no clouds, full moon hanging off to the west. I was flying a 737, doing a red-eye from San Francisco to Chicago. Nothing unusual in the cabin, no turbulence, radio chatter was minimal, just me and the autopilot watching instruments and occasionally scanning the sky. I'd been up for about 6 hours, and honestly my eyes were starting to drag. That's when I noticed it. At first, just a vague, dark shape moving underneath me, off to my left. The moonlight made the horizon glow faintly, and this thing looked like a shadow sliding across that glow. No blinking lights, no navigation beacons, nothing like a plane or helicopter. I tilted my head, trying to focus. It was huge, maybe the size of a football field at least. And it wasn't moving like a jet. It moved smoothly, steady, almost like it was gliding under me. I checked the radar screen. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No blips, no echoes, nothing to suggest another aircraft nearby. That's what got me really uneasy. I called up center, asked if they were tracking anything at our altitude or just below us. The controller sounded a little confused but said no, nothing on their radar. No flights, no weather balloons, no military exercises in the area. I kept my eyes on it, watching as it moved silently beneath the plane. There was no engine noise, no turbulence, no change in the air pressure or temperature on my gauges. Nothing. It looked like a triangle, a big, flat triangle. The edges were sharp but faintly glowing, not bright like lights, more like a soft outline against the darkness. The whole thing moved smoothly, parallel to my flight path, but in the opposite direction. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds before it slipped out from under me and vanished into the night. I called center again, asked if anything had changed. Nothing. The radar still showed nothing. I logged the sighting, filled out the report when I landed. The airline didn't ask many questions, probably chalked it up to some kind of atmospheric illusion or equipment glitch. But I know what I saw. It was real. And no one can explain it. I was flying my drone out over the old Harper Field just after sunset, trying to get some shots for my cousin's birthday video. The place is just this wide open patch of grass and weeds on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it's quiet and the sky opens up nice there. I'd never been out there at dusk before, so I figured it'd be cool to get some golden hour footage. My dog, Juno, a little border collie mix with way too much energy, was tagging along, sniffing around and chasing bugs. I set the drone up on my phone, did the usual pre-flight check, and sent it up. It climbed smooth, no issues, hovering about 100 feet up. I started to guide it slowly across the field, capturing the treetops on the far side, the empty dirt roads, winding past old barns. Everything was going fine, but then about 3 minutes into the flight, the feed froze. Just straight up stopped. I checked the signal. Lost connection. I tried to bring it back manually, but nothing happened. The drone stayed stuck in the same spot in the sky, no response. I kept tapping controls, restarting the app, moving around to get a better signal, but it was dead. Then, out of nowhere, the connection popped back on. When I looked at the time, exactly 66 seconds had passed between losing and regaining signal. Weird, right? I double-checked the area. No power lines, no big metal structures, just empty grass and a few trees. Nothing that should have blocked the signal like that. Later that night, after dinner, I sat down with my cousin to review the footage. The video was normal up to the moment the drone lost connection. Smooth, steady shots. But then, when the feed returned, there was this weird shift. At first, the footage was just static, grainy. Then the drone seemed to be moving fast over the field, but the movement didn't match anything I was controlling. It was like It took off on its own, shooting across the sky at an angle that didn't make sense. What really got me was this massive shadow moving under the drone. It wasn't like a tree or a cloud, way too big and fast. The shadow was this dark triangular shape, almost perfectly defined, and it moved faster than any bird or plane I've ever seen in the area. It zoomed under the drone and vanished behind the trees in seconds. I showed the clip to my cousin, and he said it looked like something huge was hiding out there. I agreed, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. The thing was, there was no sound on the footage, no engine noise, or anything that might explain it. The next day, I went back to the field with Juno. I tried to fly the drone again, but the signal dropped as soon as it got more than 100 feet up. The same spot every time, right over the center of the field. I was starting to get freaked out. I talked to some local farmers, hoping someone else might have noticed something strange. One guy, Rick, said he sometimes hears odd noises late at night near the Harper field. Low humming sounds that fade in and out. Another neighbor said their dog refuses to go near the edge of the field, just like Juno did the night before, pacing nervously and growling at nothing. Over the next few nights, I kept an eye on the place from my porch window. The sky looked normal, no weird lights or anything unusual. But once or twice, I thought I saw faint shadows moving at the tree line, just barely catching the corner of my eye. I didn't mention it to anyone. Not really sure what to say. The whole thing felt like a glitch in the world. Like the field was hiding something just beneath the surface, and every now and then it flickered through, like the drone caught a glimpse. I'm still not sure what I saw in that footage. Nothing in any of my drone manuals or forums matches a shadow like that or a signal loss timed so exactly. And Juno's been acting weird ever since. More jumpy, staring at the field like she sees something I don't. I haven't flown the drone there again. Not yet, anyway. I was walking my dog, a scrappy mutt named Jasper, just past the edge of town one evening when I noticed something weird. It was late spring, the kind of clear night where you can see a ton of stars. I like to take Jasper out to this little path behind Miller's farm, mostly dirt, overgrown a bit, with the forest lining the far side. Usually, it's peaceful, just the rustling of trees and Jasper sniffing around. This night was different. I glanced up toward the treetops, and there it was, a small red light blinking on and off, just hovering right above the tree line. It wasn't moving, not at all, just steady, like a signal light on a tower or something. Except there's no tower out there, just woods. Jasper didn't seem to notice it, but I stopped dead in my tracks and stared. The light blinked every 2 or 3 seconds, perfectly regular, but it didn't look like any airplane light I'd ever seen. No green, no white, just this deep red, blinking slowly. The forest was quiet, no sound of helicopters or drones, nothing. I figured maybe it was some kind of hunting or logging equipment, maybe a marker or a drone left hanging, but there wasn't anything around. I called Jasper and kept walking, but I kept sneaking glances back at that light. When I got home, I told my wife Lila about it. She just shrugged, said it was probably some kid messing around with a drone or a hunting lamp. I didn't press it. I didn't want to sound crazy. The next night, I took Jasper back out to the same spot around the same time. I wasn't expecting to see the light again, but sure enough, it was there. This time, though, it was a little further to the east, maybe a few hundred feet along the forest line. Same red blinking, same steady pulse. It wasn't moving side to side, just there, fixed in place. I stopped again, pulled my jacket tighter around me because it was chilly now. Jasper was quiet, looking at me like he knew something was off. The weird thing was, there wasn't any other noise. No engines, no voices, no animals. It was just the light blinking and this absolute stillness. I tried to figure out if it was a drone again, but the way it just stayed so still in one place, even when I moved closer, didn't make sense. It was like it wasn't affected by wind or anything. The third night, I went with Lila and Jasper. I wanted her to see it too, figure out what was going on. We walked the path together, and once again, the red light appeared, this time even further east, over a clearing that's usually full of tall grass and wildflowers. We stopped, both staring up at it. Lila said, "That's not normal," and I couldn't disagree. Then something else happened. The light blinked faster, like it was trying to get our attention. It wasn't scary exactly, more weird, like it was communicating somehow. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Jasper was still quiet, which was strange because he's usually barking at anything unusual. We didn't hear anything else, no buzzing or humming, no crackle on radios or phones, just that blinking red light. I tried calling the local ranger station the next day, asked if anyone else had reported strange lights near the forest, but they said nothing unusual had been logged. No search parties, no rescue teams, no drone activity. Just normal patrols. Over the next week, the red light kept showing up every night, drifting slowly east along the tree line, maybe a couple 100 feet a night. Each time, it blinked at the same slow pace, always red, always just above the trees. I started timing it and the blinking never changed, exactly 2 seconds on, 2 seconds off. I stopped telling Lila about it after a while because she was getting annoyed, saying I was wasting my time. But I kept going out, mostly alone, with Jasper. One night, I decided to bring my old binoculars to get a better look. I thought maybe it was some kind of weird beacon or a light hanging from a tree branch, maybe some prank. When I focused, though, I couldn't make out any shape around the light. No wires, no frame, no movement. It was just a blinking red dot, suspended in midair. I noticed then that the forest below the light looked darker, like it was casting a shadow down onto the trees. Not a regular shadow like from the moon or streetlights, but a dense, black patch that didn't move when the light blinked. That unsettled me more than anything else. A few nights after that, I was standing in the same clearing when Jasper suddenly stiffened up and started growling low. I looked around but saw nothing. The red light was there again, blinking steadily, but something about it felt different, more intense. That night, the air was thick and heavy. It's like right before a storm, but the sky was clear. I remember feeling this weird pressure in my chest, like something was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Jasper refused to move from my side. I tried calling out, but my voice sounded muffled, like I was underwater. I told Jasper to come, but he wouldn't budge. Then the light blinked faster, like a strobe, but not quite, and the shadow under it seemed to ripple, almost like water. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on it. When I was about 50 feet away, the light snapped off. Just went dark. The shadow vanished too. The forest looked normal again. I got home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept hearing this low thrum in my ears, almost like a heartbeat. Jasper stayed close, whining softly. The following week, the light stopped showing up. No blinking red dot, no shadow, nothing. I went back to the path a few times, but felt uneasy, like the place itself was watching me now. I don't know what it was. None of it made sense. No planes, no drones, no signals. Just that red blinking light moving slowly across the forest line every night with a shadow underneath that didn't belong. Jasper still looks at the forest sometimes, ears perked, like he's waiting for something to come back. And me? I'm just trying to forget about it, but I can't quite shake the feeling that something was there, watching, and maybe still is. We'd been planning the trip for months. Me and Clara decided to get out of the city for a weekend, just the two of us and her dog, a scrappy little mutt named Rufus. We picked a spot in the San Gabriel Mountains, not too far from Los Angeles, but remote enough to feel like we'd gone somewhere completely different. I don't remember the last time I'd slept outside under actual stars. We got there late Saturday afternoon. The air was dry but cool, the kind of crisp you don't really notice until the sun goes down. We found a clearing about a half-mile off the main trail, set up the tent, and started a small fire. Rufus was buzzing around, sniffing every bush and rock like he was on some grand adventure himself. The first night was uneventful, just the usual crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of something moving in the brush. Nothing out of the ordinary, no weird noises or anything. Clara and I were sharing a bottle of cheap red wine, talking about work and stupid stuff while Rufus lay curled up between us. I remember thinking it was exactly the kind of normal, peaceful weekend I needed. Then, around 10:30 p.m., something caught our attention. I was staring into the fire when Clara grabbed my arm and pointed toward the ridge about 2 miles to the east. There was this bright orange glow, like a fireball falling behind the trees. At first, I thought it was just a plane on fire or maybe a meteorite landing. The glow was moving down the slope really fast, disappearing behind the ridgeline. It wasn't a shooting star or a typical meteor, though. This looked like something much bigger, slower. The light was intense, casting long, sharp shadows across the treetops. Clara and I just sat there, frozen. Rufus growled softly and bristled, staring in the same direction. The fireball didn't come back up or flicker again. After about 5 minutes, everything went dark and quiet. No smoke, no sound of an explosion, nothing. Neither of us said much after that. We tried to shake it off, blaming it on some weird atmospheric thing or a distant wildfire. We turned in early, but neither of us really slept. I kept checking the ridge every hour, but nothing happened. The next morning, the sky was clear and bright, the air smelling of pine and dry earth. We packed up the fire and decided to hike over to the spot where we saw the fireball go down. It was maybe a 3-mile trek from our campsite, up and around some jagged boulders and through thick brush. The whole way, something felt off. Rufus kept looking back over his shoulder, ears pricked, like he knew something was following us but wasn't telling us. I caught Clara glancing around nervously too, her usual easy smile gone. When we reached the ridge's far side, there was no obvious crater or debris, no sign of any crash. But there was this weird circular patch of ground, maybe 15 feet across. The grass and underbrush inside it were completely scorched black, but there was no burnt wood or trees, no smell of smoke lingering. Just a clean, scorched circle on the earth. It looked like someone had taken a giant blowtorch to that spot and nothing else around it. No footprints, no tire tracks, no animal prints. Even Rufus stopped at the edge and wouldn't go in. He growled low and backed away. I walked around it slowly, poking at the ground with a stick. The dirt was dry but smelled faintly metallic, almost like burnt copper or something chemical. I didn't touch it with my hands. Clara was quiet, just staring at the patch like it meant something she couldn't say out loud. We circled the area twice, looking for anything else unusual. Scraps of metal, pieces of plastic, anything that might explain what had caused it. But there was nothing. We took a couple pictures on my phone and headed back, both of us weirdly silent. The hike back felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. Rufus stayed close, sometimes glancing up at the trees like he was waiting for something. That evening, we made a small fire near the tent and tried to relax, but I couldn't stop thinking about the scorched circle. I asked Clara if she felt anything weird when we were out there. She said she did, that the air felt wrong, like it was buzzing quietly, but she couldn't explain it. Before we went to sleep, Rufus wouldn't come into the tent. He sat outside, staring up at the ridge where we'd seen the fireball the night before. His hackles were raised, and he growled low and steady all night. When we woke up Sunday morning, the scorched circle was on my mind all over again. We packed up and started heading back down the mountain, keeping our eyes on the ridge. Driving back through the winding forest roads, I noticed something weird on my phone's compass app. It was spinning slowly, like it was off by a couple degrees, but the GPS worked fine. Clara said her phone showed the same thing. Neither of us could explain it. We got home that afternoon, but the sense of unease didn't leave me for days. Rufus refused to go near the backyard without me, and Clara kept asking me if I thought the fireball was real or just some kind of trick. I've looked online, checked fire reports, meteor sightings, even contacted the ranger station near the area. Nothing about a fireball, no reports of crashes or wildfires at that time. Every time I think about it, I'm stuck on that scorched circle, how clean and unnatural it looked in the middle of all that untouched forest. Something happened there, whatever it was, but there was no wreckage, no smoke, no noise, just a burned patch of earth and a dog who didn't want to get any closer. I don't know what we saw. I don't even know if it was something physical or just some kind of weird light show. But it wasn't a meteor, not like anything I'd ever heard of. And Rufus still won't go near the ridge. We were all packed into Jake's backyard just after midnight, sprawled across lawn chairs and blankets, eyes turned skyward. It was the Perseid meteor shower, and he'd invited a small group over, me, Sarah, Luis, and his girlfriend, Maya. Jake's backyard was one of those weirdly perfect little spots nestled in a quiet suburb of Flagstaff, Arizona, surrounded by tall pines that blocked most of the streetlights. It felt like you could see the whole universe if you just stared hard enough. The night was clear but cold, a dry chill that settled into your bones. We'd brought a thermos of coffee and a couple of beers, but mostly we just sat there in near silence, waiting for something to streak across the sky. The air smelled like pine and dust, and Rufus, Jake's border collie mix, was dozing, curled up near the fire pit, his ears twitching every now and then. The meteors started coming in small bursts, shooting thin white lines across the sky. I kept catching myself holding my breath whenever one passed overhead. Sarah was lying back on the grass, pointing out constellations like she knew what she was talking about. Luis was trying to get some photos with his phone, but kept complaining the camera wasn't fast enough. Maya was quiet, just watching, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the embers. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, this one meteor, bright, orange, bigger than the rest, appeared near the southwest horizon. It was moving fast, like a firecracker shot into the sky, except it didn't keep falling. Midway through its path, it just stopped. Hanging there, motionless, no fading, no trail, just a bright orange ball hanging against the dark sky. We all froze. I swear, even Rufus lifted his head. For a few seconds, maybe 5, it just stayed in one spot. No flicker, no dimming, just a steady glow. Then, suddenly it shot straight up, like it was reversing or taking off. It accelerated insanely fast, disappearing into the black. Nobody said a word for what felt like a minute. Then Luis laughed nervously, like trying to break a weird spell. "Did you guys just see that?" Jake nodded slowly, eyes wide. "Yeah, that wasn't normal." Sarah looked unsettled, sitting up. "It wasn't a meteor, right? Meteors don't just stop like that." Maya shook her head. "No way." I was trying to make sense of it too, but couldn't. It wasn't like anything I'd read about shooting stars or meteors. The rest of the shower went on like usual. More streaks, some faint ones, some bright, but none like that. No other lights stopped in midair or shot straight up. After maybe an hour, we started packing up, still talking in low voices about what we'd seen. Rufus stayed close to Jake's feet the whole time, acting jumpy like he was sensing something. The next morning, I woke up with a weird feeling in my chest, like something had shifted. I checked my phone for news, but found nothing about unusual meteor activity or anything strange in the area. I texted Jake, and he said he was still thinking about it too. He mentioned that Rufus wouldn't go near the backyard when the sun came up, pacing and growling at the edge of the trees. Over the next few days, none of us brought it up much, but whenever we were together, the memory hung there, silent and strange. Rufus stayed skittish too, sometimes barking at nothing in the backyard or refusing to come inside. I can't say what that light was. I don't know if it was a meteor or something else entirely, but I remember how unnatural it felt. Like the rules of the sky got rewritten for just a moment. And for a while after, I kept looking up, half expecting to see something hanging there again, frozen in the dark. I was out on the lake early that morning, well before sunrise, the kind of quiet where the world feels paused. The water was glassy smooth, no breeze at all, and the air smelled cold and damp. I had my little aluminum boat anchored near the middle of Silver Pine Lake, a spot I'd fished for years. My dog, Rook, a scruffy terrier mix, was curled up on the floor of the boat, eyes half closed but alert to every sound. I like fishing early because the water's calm, and I can think without distractions. That morning felt different right away. Everything was still, but it was the kind of still that presses on you like something's waiting just under the surface. I'd been watching the float for maybe 20 minutes when I noticed it. The water wasn't as still as I thought. Ripples started forming, but not like from a fish or a dropped lure. These were perfect circles, spreading out evenly from a point right about 20 feet in front of the boat. What freaked me out was there was no reason for them. No wind, no jumping fish, nothing falling in. The ripples kept spreading like someone was dropping stones in the water rhythmically, but I couldn't see any disturbance on the surface. I watched, rubbing my eyes because I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or my tiredness playing games, but Rook suddenly perked up and stood, growling low, staring at the ripples too. The circles kept forming, overlapping, growing wider, perfect and precise. They weren't random, like the usual rings you get from a splash. These were calculated, like someone was drawing with water. I called out to the lake, half joking, "Who's there? Stop messing with my fish." No answer, just the ripple spreading in silence. I looked around, scanning the shoreline. It was miles away, thick with pine trees and a few cabins, but no one was moving. The whole lake was still except for those ripples. I grabbed my phone to check the time and signal. Barely any bars out there, and no messages or missed calls. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was off, but the ripples kept coming, like a heartbeat in the water. I leaned over the side of the boat, trying to catch sight of what could be causing it. Nothing. Just the dark water, smooth except for the circles. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like the water was watching me back. Quiet, but heavy. After a while, I noticed the ripples were speeding up, faster now, like a pulse growing urgent. I checked the sky. Still just before dawn, stars fading but no clouds or wind. Suddenly, the water in the middle of those circles started to glow faintly, a pale blue light shimmering beneath the surface. It wasn't bright enough to light up the boat, but it was definitely there, pulsing softly in sync with the ripples. I blinked, and the light vanished. Rook growled again, stepping toward the front of the boat, hackles raised. I grabbed his collar and held him back, heart pounding. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I'd seen before. I reached for the oars, thinking maybe I'd row closer to the source, but the ripples stopped the moment I started moving. The water flattened again, completely still like nothing had happened. I sat there, frozen for a minute, listening. No birds, no bugs, no wind, nothing but the faint creak of the boat. Then, just as I was about to call it a weird morning and head back, I saw it. A dark shape moving under the water right where the ripples had been. It wasn't a fish, at least not any fish I know. It was too big, slow, and smooth, like a shadow sliding just beneath the surface. I leaned in to get a better look, and for a moment it felt like the lake was holding its breath with me. Then the shape was gone. No splash, no wave, nothing to show it was ever there except that empty space and the lingering stillness. I started the motor and headed back to shore fast, Rook whining softly at my feet. The closer I got, the more the normal sounds of the forest returned, birds waking up, a breeze rustling the leaves. When I got back to the dock, I told a couple of the other fishermen about the ripples and the light, but they just laughed it off. Must have been a loon or something, one said. But I know what I saw. That night I couldn't sleep. The ripples, the light, the shadow, they kept playing in my head like a broken record. I went back to the lake the next morning, same spot, same time, but everything was normal. No ripples, no light, no shadows. I don't know what was under the water that day. I don't know if it was something natural or something else. All I know is that lake held something strange for a few minutes, and I was the only one there to see it. I drive a delivery van for a local courier company in southern Oregon. My route takes me through a mix of sleepy towns, farmland, and stretches of forested backroads. The weirdest part of it all happens on this one stretch of road I pass almost every day, a little over 5 miles between two towns called Willow Creek and Edson. Nothing fancy, just narrow, 2-lane pavement cutting through thick pines on both sides. The first time it happened, I was driving alone, listening to my playlist on shuffle through the van's old stereo system, which honestly isn't that great, but it does the job. I remember it was a clear late summer evening, just after sunset. The sky was fading to deep blue with a few stars already showing. I'd just picked up a package in Willow Creek and was heading toward Edson to drop it off. Around the halfway point on that road, my phone suddenly skipped 3 songs in a row. Not in a normal skip button pressed kind of way. It was more like the songs just jumped, cutting out and shifting quickly from one track to the next, like the playlist was glitching. The weird part was the timing. It always happened at the exact same spot, right where the road curves gently near a stand of old-growth firs. I thought maybe my phone was acting up or the Bluetooth was glitching, but I checked the device and nothing seemed wrong. I fiddled with the settings, made sure the app was updated, even restarted my phone once I got to Edson. But that first night, it happened right there again on the way back to Willow Creek. After that, it became a kind of strange routine. Every time I drove that stretch, morning or evening, sun or rain, the phone would skip exactly 3 songs, always starting and ending on the same ones. The songs themselves weren't anything special, just random picks from my playlist, but the pattern was consistent. No other part of the route caused this, and if I rewound or tried to listen again, the skipping wouldn't happen anywhere else. One night, a few weeks after I noticed the pattern, I was driving that road under a thick fog. I'd been delivering to a farm near Edson, and the air was damp and cold. The visibility was so low I had to slow way down and keep my headlights on low beam. As usual, when I hit the curve near the first, the phone skipped the 3 songs again. But then I noticed something else. The fog around the curve was denser, almost like it was clinging to the trees in an unnatural way. I could see shapes moving just past the edge of the road, branches swaying when there was no wind, shadows that looked like figures standing motionless among the trunks. My gut twisted, but I kept driving. The fog seemed to thicken right where the skipping happened, and I swear the air felt colder, heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing but the dim taillights fading behind me. No cars, no people, nothing. I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, tired from long hours, and the eerie fog making me imagine things. But the phone skips weren't imagination. They were real and reproducible every single time. One afternoon, I was heading back late from a delivery. The sun was dipping low behind the hills, painting the sky orange and pink. I had Rolo with me, my mutt with the floppy ears who likes to stick his head out the window on long drives. I remember feeling tired but content, music playing softly, windows down a bit. When I reached the curve near the first, the 3-song skip happened again. This time, as the music stuttered and jumped, Rolo suddenly stiffened and started growling low in his throat. That was weird because he's usually calm in the van. I looked over and caught his eyes, wide and locked onto the passenger side window. I turned my head just as a faint light flickered between the trees, like a small orb, pale white, moving slowly behind the trunks. It wasn't bright enough to light up the road, but definitely visible. The light didn't flicker like a flashlight or car. It was steady, smooth, like it was drifting through the forest without making a sound. I slowed the van down and tried to get a better look, but when I glanced back at Rolo, he was already looking away, his ears down and tail low. I kept driving, and as soon as I passed the curve, the light vanished and the music returned to normal. Later, I called my friend Jesse, who's a bit of a local history buff, and asked if he'd heard anything about that part of the road. He told me stories about that stretch, old logging roads, a few accidents decades ago, and a rumor about some kind of watcher people sometimes reported seeing. But nothing concrete, mostly just rumors. A few days later, I tried something. I switched off the playlist and put on the radio before driving that road. The skipping didn't happen, obviously, but around the same curve the radio went dead, just static. Then a few seconds of clear signal and then static again. The whole time I was driving through that spot, I thought maybe there was a cell tower or interference, but there's nothing like that around there, just forest and empty fields. One night, I got back late from a run of deliveries. It was dark and rainy, the kind of night where the windshield wipers barely keep up. I was exhausted and just wanted to get home. That curve came up again and the phone skipped the 3 songs. Then the music stopped entirely. The screen went dark. I tried unlocking the phone, but it was frozen. The radio, too. Static. No stations. Suddenly, the van's lights flickered once, and the engine stuttered briefly. The rain sounded louder, but no other cars were on the road. Rolo growled again, louder this time. I kept going, trying not to panic, watching the road carefully. Just after the curve, the phone and radio came back on like nothing happened. The music started playing again. I pulled over a few minutes later, heart racing, and checked the phone. No apps were open, no signs of malfunction. I drove home slowly that night, avoiding that road the next day. It's been months now. I still take deliveries that way sometimes because it's the shortest route, but I avoid the curve as much as I can. Every time I do drive it, the skipping happens. The weird things, the fog, the light, the cold, they show up sometimes, but not always. I can't say what it is or why it happens, but it's become part of the road's rhythm. Like the place itself is alive somehow, watching, marking time in its own way. I'm fine now, nothing else strange has happened, but every time I drive through that curve, I watch the trees and my phone closely, and every time the playlist skips 3 songs. I live out here in northern Vermont, in a small town called Maplewood. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and the winters get seriously brutal. Last year, sometime in mid-January, after a fresh snowstorm, I woke up to something I still don't quite understand. I live alone in a modest house a few miles outside of town, surrounded mostly by woods and open fields. I have a dog named Scout, a lean husky mix who's used to the snow and cold and generally keeps me company on the long winter nights. That morning, I woke up to Scout barking downstairs, which wasn't unusual by itself. Usually he barks at squirrels or the neighbor's cat sneaking around, but something felt off. I looked at the clock. It was just before 7 a.m., still dark outside. I threw on a thick sweatshirt and headed downstairs, coffee brewing in the kitchen as I opened the back door to let Scout out. What hit me first was the cold, biting and sharp, like 1,000 tiny needles. The ground was freshly coated in a couple inches of untouched snow, except for a patch in the backyard that immediately caught my eye. There were dozens of perfectly round depressions in the snow, maybe a foot in diameter each, and maybe 6 inches deep. They formed a wide arc that stretched from the far corner of my yard near the tree line, all the way close to the back porch. The spacing between each circle was nearly identical, about 4 feet apart, neat and even like someone had measured it carefully. What really got me was that there weren't any footprints leading up to or away from these marks. Nothing. No boot prints, no dog prints, no animal tracks. Just the clean, smooth snow surrounding the circles. Scout was circling the yard, sniffing at the edges of the circles and growling low, uneasy. I called him back inside and stared at the arc, blinking hard. I mean, I've shoveled snow, shoveled walkways, cleared patches, but I don't have the strength or the tools to make perfect round depressions like that overnight. And without footprints, that didn't make sense. I grabbed my phone and took a few pictures, thinking maybe it was some kind of weird frost pattern or animal thing I hadn't seen before. But no matter how many times I looked at it, those holes were real, solid indentations in the snow. The rest of the day felt weird. I kept looking out the windows at those circles. The sun came up fully and lit the yard in a dull gray light, but the arc of circles seemed to absorb it somehow, darker, like shadows, even though the sun was high. Scout stayed close to me, more anxious than usual. That night, I made a point to get a good look from the window before bed. Around 11 p.m., the moon was out, a clear, bright crescent that made the snow glow softly. I was half dozing when I noticed faint lights flickering in the trees beyond the yard. They weren't like flashlights or lanterns. They moved slowly, hovering just above the snow, pale blue and white, flickering on and off like weak bulbs struggling to stay lit. I rubbed my eyes and grabbed my jacket to check it out. Outside, the cold was intense, so I bundled up and went to the edge of the yard. Scout followed, hesitating but obedient. The lights seemed to shift deeper into the forest, moving just out of reach behind the thick trunks. There was no sound, no wind, no animals, just this soft, unnatural glow. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to get a better look. Then the lights vanished, one by one, until everything was dark again. Scout was stiff and low growling, his ears back. I let him inside and locked the door behind us. The next morning, I was back out checking the snow. The circles were still there, untouched and unchanged. But now I noticed something else. The snow inside the depressions was different. It looked denser, like it had been packed down but without footprints or signs of anyone pressing it. Like someone or something had pressed the snow down carefully, without leaving marks. I started pacing the yard, looking for any clues. Around the edges of the circles, the snow was crisp and untouched, no disturbance. I wondered if it was some kind of animal thing, but I couldn't think of any animal that would make perfectly round holes that big and evenly spaced. Deer, foxes, coyotes, all leave tracks when they move, and none of them dig circles like that. That afternoon, I called my neighbor, a retired forestry worker named Carl, to see if he'd heard anything weird or seen something strange. Carl said nothing like that had been reported, but told me about old local legends. Stories of strange lights in the woods, and people waking up to odd marks in their yards that never made sense. Probably just the wind playing tricks with snow, or someone pulling a prank, Carl said, but even he sounded uncertain. The next night, I left the porch light on and tried to stay awake, but my eyes kept drifting shut. Around 2 a.m., Scout started barking again, sharp and urgent. I looked outside to see a pale, low light moving slowly along the far tree line, back by the depressions. It didn't look like a flashlight or headlights or anything I recognized, more like a faint glow, barely lighting the snow beneath it as it drifted in a slow, deliberate path. The light paused over one of the circles, and for a moment the air seemed to hum. Just barely, like a distant vibration you feel more in your chest than hear with your ears. I was frozen on the porch, heart racing, watching. The light moved again, hovering silently from circle to circle, pausing over each one briefly. Scout was growling low, pulling at the leash in my hand. Then, just as slowly as it had appeared, the light vanished into the trees. I went back inside, shut every window and door, and tried not to think about it. The next morning, I checked the circles again. Nothing had changed, except one thing. One of the depressions near the middle of the arc had a thin, perfectly round layer of frost covering it, like ice crystals had formed overnight only inside that circle. The rest were just plain snow. I reached out to touch it, but stopped. The frost was so cold it felt almost like glass. When I pulled my hand back, I noticed my skin felt prickly, like it had been exposed to a strong chill. Over the next week, the circles stayed the same. The frost layers spread to a few more of them, but only slowly and only on some. Every night, that pale glow would sometimes return, drifting through the woods, hovering for minutes before fading away. I stopped trying to tell anyone because the whole thing sounds crazy. No footprints, perfect circles, glowing lights, frost that only shows up in weird spots. It's not like anything I can explain or want to explain. Scout wouldn't even go near the circles during the day now. If I call him over, he comes but stays tense, ears pinned back like he knows something I don't. Eventually, the snow melted and the circles disappeared. The yard was just a yard again. But sometimes, when I'm outside late at night, I catch a faint flicker of light past the trees or feel that cold prickling on my skin. I haven't found any signs or answers. Just those circles, perfectly round, perfectly spaced, like someone left them there and walked away without a single print. I was out on my usual patrol near the eastern edge of Timber Ridge, the part of the forest nobody really visits much. It was early September, and the mornings were starting to get that sharp, cool bite that tells you fall's just around the corner. The sun was still low, casting long shadows through the thick pines. I had my morning coffee in the thermos, my old dog Rigby trotting alongside me like he owned the place. I've been a ranger here for 8 years now, so I thought I'd seen most everything. That morning, I decided to check a little trail off the main path. It was more of a game trail, barely wide enough for one person, and I usually avoided it because it wasn't marked on any maps. But something about the quiet there called me. Rigby sniffed at the ground, nose to the dirt, ears twitching. I walked slow, listening to the crunch of leaves underfoot, the occasional bird call. The forest was dense here, and the underbrush thick, but after about 20 minutes, I noticed the trees starting to thin out. Up ahead, there was a small clearing I hadn't seen before. What caught my attention first was the light. It was brighter here, but the sun wasn't high enough yet to explain it. The clearing looked natural, maybe 50 feet across, with grass growing evenly in the center. But then I noticed the trees around it. Every single trunk bent sharply inward toward the middle of the clearing, like someone had pushed them all over from the outside. I mean, really bent, low enough that most of the trunks weren't straight for several feet up. It looked like they were bowing towards something in the center. Rigby stopped and stood still, growling softly. What didn't make sense was that there was no sign of wind damage, no broken branches, no leaning in one particular direction. The trees were all bending toward the center from every angle, like the entire ring was pulled inward evenly. I circled the clearing, shining my flashlight on the trunks, looking for claw marks, cuts, anything that might explain it. There was nothing. No fire scars, no marks from equipment or animals. The bark was intact, and the ground around the trees was soft but undisturbed. It was like someone had taken every tree and bent it gently but firmly toward the center, without breaking a single one. I knelt down at the edge of the clearing, scanning the grass. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, no trash, no signs of camping. The soil was a little dry, but that was normal this time of year. Still, the shape of the clearing was almost a perfect circle, with the grass in the middle growing straighter and greener than the grass at the edges. I called Rigby over and rubbed his head. He wasn't barking or agitated anymore, but his ears were tilted back and his tail was low. Usually he's fearless out here. If something was off, he knew it. I stood up and looked into the center of the clearing. It was empty. No rocks, no stump, nothing that might have pushed the trees inward. The whole thing was just there. I pulled out my radio and tried to get in touch with the ranger station, but the signal was weak. This part of the forest was always spotty, and I wasn't surprised when I didn't get a response. I decided to mark the spot with some flagging tape so I could report it later. While I was tying the tape around a low branch, I glanced up and caught a flicker of light coming from the sky right above the clearing. It was faint, a quick flash like the kind of light you see just before lightning, but the sky was clear and there were no storms around. I looked up but saw nothing else. The forest was silent except for the rustling of leaves in a light breeze. I didn't feel like staying longer, so I turned to head back. Rigby was reluctant, looking back at the clearing more than once. I told myself it was just an odd natural phenomenon, maybe some weird growth pattern caused by soil conditions or underground water. Trees sometimes do strange things. The next day I went back with a colleague, Tom. I wanted a second opinion and maybe some better equipment to measure tree angles and soil composition. Tom was skeptical but curious. We spent hours there, measuring the bends, taking soil samples, photographing the scene. Nothing unusual showed up in the soil tests. No signs of chemicals, no burns or disturbances that could explain the perfect curve of the trunks. Tom even tried shaking a few of the trees gently, but they held their strange position firmly, almost as if they were naturally grown that way. While we worked, I kept feeling like something was watching us. The forest around the clearing was still and quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing moving except the light wind in the higher branches. It was unnatural. That evening, when I got home, Rigby wouldn't settle. He paced near the door, growling softly at the window, staring into the darkness outside. I looked out but didn't see anything. A few nights later, I couldn't shake the feeling, so I went back alone after dark. I carried a flashlight and a handheld radio, even though I doubted it'd help. When I reached the clearing, the moon was almost full, casting pale light on everything. The trees looked more surreal in the moonlight, their trunks like giant arches bending inward, enclosing the space like a silent cathedral. As I stepped closer to the center, I noticed something new. The air was colder here, like a pocket of chill in the middle of a warm forest. My breath puffed out in white clouds, even though the temperature was mild. Then I heard it. A low hum, almost inaudible at first, but growing steadily. It wasn't mechanical or animal. It was a steady vibration, like the forest itself was humming beneath my feet. I stopped, flashlight trembling in my hand. Rigby sat down quietly, ears perked, staring toward the trees. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't move. The hum seemed to come from the ground, deep beneath the clearing. It was steady, persistent, a sound you feel more than hear. I pulled out my radio and tried to call the station. Static. Then, for a moment, the hum stopped. The clearing fell silent again, the cold air fading. I glanced up. Above the tree line, a faint, pulsating light hovered just beyond the branches. It wasn't bright, more like a dull red glow, pulsing in a slow, rhythmic pattern. I blinked, and it was gone. I stood there for a long time, waiting for it to come back, but it didn't. I walked back slowly, Rigby at my side, the trees silent and still. When I got home, I double-checked the photos I'd taken that day. Nothing unusual showed up on the pictures, no lights, no distortions. I told a few people about the clearing and the hum, but nobody had heard of anything like it. Tom thought maybe it was seismic activity, but nothing on the local reports matched the timing. Now, whenever I drive past that part of the forest, I find myself looking at the tree line, half expecting to see those trunks bending again, enclosing that strange, silent space. I don't understand it. I don't know if it's some kind of natural freak or something else, but I know it's real, and it's there, just waiting in that silent clearing, bending the trees inward like some kind of quiet secret. And sometimes, when the wind dies down, I swear I can still hear that low hum coming from the forest floor, like the earth itself is trying to tell me something. It was last October, a little past peak season, but still warm enough in the afternoons to hike without a jacket. Me and Nolan went out to Cranberry Ridge, which is one of those trails nobody really uses except locals or the occasional birdwatcher. No bathrooms, no signs, just a gravel pull-off and a barely maintained path that loops around a few hills. We liked it because it was quiet, and there was a spot near the top where the trees opened up just enough to see the western ridgeline and a bit of the valley. We took his dog, Poppy. She's a wiry little terrier mix with one bad ear and way too much energy. Nolan kept her leash looped around his pack, but let her run ahead most of the time. We didn't expect to see anybody else out there. It was about 3:30 when we started. Sun was low, but not close to setting. The air was still, just cool enough to make you keep moving. I remember Poppy darting around like she was on a mission, nose down, tail up, constantly circling back to make sure we were still coming. Nolan had one of those little flasks in his jacket, and we passed it back and forth as we hiked. Just a lazy, normal afternoon. We made it to that overlook spot around 5. Sun was hitting the far ridge just right, all golden on the tops of the trees. We sat on this big flat rock and didn't talk much. I pulled out some trail mix. Nolan lit a cigarette. Poppy chased something in the brush and came back with a burr stuck to her face. It was him that noticed it first, the thing in the trees. He was mid-sentence, talking about some argument he'd had with his sister, and just kind of trailed off. I looked over and saw him squinting at something above the tree line to our left, about 100 yards off. He didn't say anything at first, just pointed. I followed his finger and saw what looked like, I don't know, like a mirror. It was up high, way higher than any branch should have been able to hold anything that size. Just this strange, roundish, reflective thing, like a warped sheet of chrome hovering way up in the canopy. Not moving, just sitting there, partially hidden between the upper branches. It was maybe the size of a compact car. No real shape I could describe, just kind of a smooth blob. But it caught the sunlight in a way that made it flicker, almost like it was rippling, even though there was no wind. At first I thought maybe it was a weather balloon or some kind of mylar debris, but it wasn't drifting, it was dead still, and too high up to be stuck on anything I could see. There were no birds near it, which I noticed without meaning to. The whole section of trees just felt still, like the air around it wasn't part of the rest of the forest. Nolan pulled out his phone to zoom in, but he couldn't get a clear shot through the branches. The glare made it impossible to focus. We stood there watching it for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, just trying to figure out what we were looking at. Then Poppy started barking. Not her usual yappy bark. It was deeper, more aggressive. She was facing the direction of the object, low to the ground, tail rigid. When we tried to calm her, she wouldn't take her eyes off it. I don't know why we didn't go closer. I think both of us had that same weird internal hesitation, like it wasn't a good idea. I remember Nolan saying, "Let's come back tomorrow with binoculars." And that was it. We left. Back at the truck, we talked it through like two kids convincing each other a haunted house wasn't real. Could have been trash, could have been glare, maybe something from a drone or one of those temporary weather stations. But I know what I saw. That thing was hovering, and it wasn't made of anything I recognized. We came back the next day, earlier this time around noon, with Nolan's binoculars and my old DSLR. I brought a zoom lens. Poppy was in the back seat, whining and pacing even before we got out. When we got to the overlook, I didn't recognize it at first. The trees on that side were different. At least 30 of them, all in the direction we'd seen the object, were bare, totally stripped of leaves like it was January, and not just dropped leaves either. The branches looked dry and brittle like they'd been hit with frost or fire, but there were no scorch marks, no blackening, just dead. It was silent again. No birds, not even bugs. Nolan set up the binoculars and scanned the treetops. I took a few photos, but there was nothing there anymore. No reflection, no shape, just empty space where we'd seen it. We walked a little closer this time, maybe 50 yards into the dead patch. The ground felt weird. Not soft, but kind of loose, like the soil had been stirred up and packed back down. The trees creaked in the wind even though the rest of the forest was still. I remember touching one of the trunks and feeling this odd vibration, faint but steady, like holding your hand near a transformer. I didn't say anything. I figured I was imagining it. Nolan kept checking the binoculars. At one point, he stopped and looked at me and said, "The tops are all sheared off." I didn't know what he meant, so he handed me the binocs. When I looked up, I saw it. About 10 or 12 of the trees had missing tops, just blunt, clean breaks where the upper branches should have been. Not jagged like storm damage, not splintered, just smooth, almost like they'd been sliced off and lifted away. We stood there for a while, not really sure what we were supposed to do. There wasn't anything to collect or report. No signs of people, no crash debris. Just this unnatural quiet and the hollow sound of Poppy growling low in her throat. She didn't leave the trailhead when we got back, refused to walk past a certain point on the path. We had to carry her to the truck. Later that night, Nolan texted me that his phone's compass app kept spinning when he stood in that area. He'd tried it while I was taking pictures, just out of curiosity. Didn't mention it at the time because he thought it was a glitch. I tried the same thing a few days later with mine, but the compass just froze completely. Wouldn't update at all. The photos I took came out normal, nothing strange in them. But the colors look off in that section of forest, like the white balance didn't know what to do. Everything's got this washed out gray-blue tint. I showed them to a friend who does photography, and he thought maybe the sensor got confused by the lack of contrast. But the rest of the shots from that day look fine. We haven't been back since. I drive past the trailhead sometimes, but I don't stop. I asked around, park rangers, a guy who runs a hiking blog, even someone from the local birding club, and none of them knew anything about defoliation in that area. No mention of it in the county records either. Nolan says we should go back with a drone. I keep saying, yeah, maybe, but I never bring it up first, and he hasn't pushed. I think he knows I don't want to. I was out in the back pasture just after dusk, finishing up the last of the chores. It was late summer, the kind of evening where the air hangs heavy and still with just a slight breeze off the ridge. I was checking on the cows before heading inside. Usual routine, nothing special. But that night, I noticed something that didn't sit right. There were 3 cows standing together near the north edge of the field, lined up in a straight row. Not side by side, but all facing the same way, perfectly still. Usually when I walk out, they scatter or at least look up. But these 3 were just frozen, staring out toward the far tree line like they were waiting for something. I called out to them, clapping my hands and whistling, but no reaction. I even flashed my flashlight at them one by one. Nothing, not a single twitch. The rest of the herd was scattered around, doing their own thing, but these 3 stayed put. It was weird enough that I slowed down, staring at them from maybe 30 feet away. The closest cow was a big old red Angus named B, and behind her was a black and white Holstein called Jeb, with a younger brown one named Daisy at the back. None of them moved. I circled them, trying to catch their eyes or get them to turn, but they kept staring ahead like they were hypnotized or something. I checked my watch. They stayed like that for a good 5 minutes. I was getting chilly, and the sky was darkening fast now, the last light fading. When I finally stepped back and called Jasper, my dog, to head home, the cows still hadn't moved. The next morning, I went back out early with some coffee, figuring maybe it was just some weird behavior from the night before. But they were still in the same spot, same formation, facing the same way. I walked closer this time, and Jeb finally blinked, then shifted his weight, but Bea and Daisy didn't move. I knocked on the side of a metal bucket nearby to make noise. Nothing. The two cows just stood there like statues. I texted my neighbor Paul, who's a cattle guy too, and asked if he'd seen anything like this before. He said he hadn't, but suggested maybe it was some kind of animal instinct. Maybe they heard a predator or were sensing something I couldn't. I told him I'd keep an eye on them. That afternoon, I went back to the barn, but I kept thinking about those cows. I decided to take Jasper out again for a walk along the edge of the forest near the field. The sun was setting low, and the air was turning cool and damp. As I walked, I kept glancing at the tree line. That's when I noticed it, a faint glow deep in the woods, maybe 100 yards away. It was soft, like a light bulb behind fog, but I knew there wasn't anything out there that would give off light at that hour. No cabins, no campers. The glow pulsed slowly, like breathing. I stopped and watched for a while. The light shifted slightly, then vanished altogether. I blinked and looked again, but nothing. Jasper growled low, looking in the same direction, hair on his neck standing up. I called him back, but he stayed still, staring. The next night, things got even stranger. I went out to the pasture right after dinner, and the three cows were back in formation. Same order, same direction. But this time, it was darker, and the air felt heavier, like the calm right before a storm. I shined my flashlight on them, and again, no reaction. I raised my voice, clapping loudly, but they ignored it. Jasper was on edge, pacing behind me and growling softly. Then I noticed the light again, this time flickering between the trees near the pasture's edge, low down and moving slowly along the underbrush. It wasn't steady or bright, more like fireflies, but too large and too slow to be insects. The weird thing was, the light didn't come from above or behind the trees. It seemed to be on the ground. I watched it for maybe 10 minutes, feeling like I was holding my breath. Suddenly, the cows all turned their heads simultaneously toward the light, but not like normal animals would. Their heads snapped around in perfect sync like they were puppets on strings. Their eyes reflected the faint light, but they didn't move their bodies. I felt my heart speed up. Jasper barked once sharply and lunged forward, but I held him back. The light flickered again, then vanished completely. After a minute, the cows slowly turned their heads back to the original direction and stood still, like nothing had happened. I left the field fast that night, Jasper tugging on his leash to get away from whatever was out there. The next day, I talked to Paul again. He came out with me, and when we got to the spot, the cows were back in formation. This time, all of them looked alert and grazing, but the marks in the grass around them were strange. The ground was flattened in neat circles, almost like the cows had been standing on patches that had been pressed down tightly. Paul looked at me and said, "This isn't normal." He told me about some old stories he'd heard growing up, tales about lights in the woods and animals acting odd. I shrugged it off mostly, but the feeling of unease stuck with me. Over the next few days, the cows acted more or less normally, but the formation thing happened a couple more times. Every time it was at dusk, always facing toward the same patch of forest. One evening, I stayed out late, hoping to catch whatever was causing this. Jasper and I sat just beyond the tree line, watching. The forest was silent except for the occasional chirp of crickets. Around 9 p.m., the strange light appeared again, hovering low just inside the trees. It was soft and red, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I tried to move closer, but Jasper whimpered and pulled back, clearly uneasy. The light stayed for about 15 minutes, then slowly faded. I started walking home, feeling watched. I glanced back once and saw the cows again, standing in their formation by the field's edge, their heads all turned toward me, reflecting the dim moonlight. I hurried the last stretch home and locked the door behind me. Since then, the cows haven't done the formation thing. The light hasn't come back either. But sometimes, when I'm outside late with Jasper, I swear I catch a glimpse of something red and pulsing deep in the woods. I don't know what any of it meant or why it happened. Maybe the cows sensed something I couldn't, or maybe it was nothing at all. All I know is that summer, something was there in those trees, and it was watching. It started on a Wednesday night just after 9. I just finished mowing the lawn late because of the heat. It'd been over 100 that afternoon, so I waited until the sun dipped low enough to stop cooking the driveway. I was out in the garage, putting the mower back, when I heard a loud clunk from across the street. I figured it was just Randy's old truck acting up again. But when I looked over, I saw his garage door rolling open, real slow, then stopping, then closing again, then opening. Each time, the motor made that heavy buzzing sound, followed by a thud when it reversed directions. It cycled through 3 or 4 times before just stopping halfway up. I didn't think much of it at first. Automatic doors act up sometimes, especially older ones like his. But then I noticed ours doing the exact same thing. I turned around, and sure enough, our garage door had started moving on its own. It had been closed. Now it was halfway open. Then it reversed and went down again, paused for a few seconds, then started up. Same pattern as Randy's. I thought maybe Carla was messing with the remote, so I stuck my head inside and called out. She was in the kitchen, feeding the dogs. Didn't even have the remote near her. I grabbed it off the counter just in case and stood in the garage watching. Then I heard more motors. I walked out to the edge of the driveway and looked around. Across the street, 2 more garage doors. The Liptons and old Mrs. Garcia's were doing the same thing. Open, pause, close, pause, repeat, all synced up like they were running on the same timer. I stood there just watching, holding our remote in one hand, not pressing anything. It wasn't like a short or a stuck button. I even popped the batteries out. Didn't stop it. Ours kept cycling along with the others, and then, just as suddenly, they all stopped. Same time. Every garage door froze wherever it was. Some halfway open, some closed. Ours was about a third of the way up. Totally quiet now, except for a dog barking a few streets over. I went back in and told Carla. She said she hadn't noticed anything, which made sense. The kitchen windows don't face the street, but when she followed me out, she saw it too. A couple doors still left half open. We figured maybe a power surge, even though the house lights hadn't flickered or anything. That theory went out the window the next morning. I was getting the paper around 6:30. It was already muggy, sky starting to turn orange. I looked up the street and saw Ray, 3 houses down, crouched next to his garage motor with the cover off. I walked over to see if he'd had the same issue. He had. He said his door had gone up and down 5 or 6 times, then froze open around 9:15. He'd unplugged it and left it open all night. As we were talking, his wife came out and mentioned she'd seen our door doing the same thing when she looked out to check the porch lights. So it wasn't just me noticing it. And it wasn't random. When I got to work, I called the HOA and asked if anyone had reported weird garage behavior. The woman on the phone just said, "You too?" Apparently, she'd gotten 6 calls that morning already, all from people on our side of the neighborhood. Same deal, doors opening and closing on their own, perfectly timed. Some people thought it was a hacker. Others said it had to be some new contractor testing equipment nearby. One guy said it was probably solar flares. The power company denied any fluctuations. The HOA sent out a mass email saying they were looking into possible RF interference and that people should keep their remotes unplugged if they were concerned. Nothing happened that night. I kept ours unplugged anyway, just in case. Friday night, it started again. Same time, 9:15 sharp. Carla and I were watching a movie when I heard that hum again. Not just ours this time. You could hear it from every direction. I ran out front. There were at least 8 doors moving up and down on our block, all in sync again. The hum of the motors echoed down the street like some weird chorus. I stood there watching and realized something. It was exactly the same pattern as before. Each door moved for about 7 seconds, paused for 3, down, pause, up again, repeating for 4 full cycles. Then on the 5th, they all stopped mid-movement, just like the first time. By then, a few neighbors were outside too. Randy was across the street, holding his remote up in the air, swearing. Old Mrs. Garcia had come out in her robe. She looked spooked. Nobody said much. We all just kind of stood there staring at the still open garages. I went back inside, pulled the breaker for ours, and left it like that overnight. Saturday morning, I talked to Ray again. He'd checked his remote frequency, swapped out the batteries, even tried switching his unit to a rolling code system. No change. I asked him if he'd noticed anything else weird. and he hesitated a second before saying, "You mean the sky thing?" I said I didn't know what he was talking about. He told me that right before the doors started up Friday night, he'd been out back with his dog, Scoot. Said he saw a flash behind the tree line. Not lightning, just a quick white flicker, low to the ground like a camera flash, but silent. Then 2 minutes later, the garages started going. That stuck in my head all day. So that night, I set up a lawn chair on the driveway and brought out my binoculars. I didn't tell Carla, she'd just roll her eyes. I figured maybe it was some kid with a drone or maybe a utility crew running tests after all. I sat there until about 9:12. Nothing unusual, just crickets, a bit of wind. Then, exactly at 9:15, the first motor kicked on. This time it was ours. I watched as it rolled up about a third of the way, stopped, reversed, paused, repeated, and from across the street, the same sound started. Then behind me, all timed perfectly again. I didn't touch the remote. I stood up and looked toward the tree line at the end of our cul-de-sac, and I saw the flicker. Same as Ray described. Just once. A quick, clean white flash about 5 feet off the ground, maybe 20 yards deep into the trees. No sound, no movement afterward, just that pulse of light like a shutter going off. Then all the garage doors stopped. Same second. Mid-roll. I walked slowly down the street toward the trees. Not into them, just to the end where the last street lamp flickers out. It was dead quiet, not even the crickets now. I stayed there about 10 minutes watching. I had this awful feeling like I was being watched back. Hard to explain. Just a pressure, like something was sitting right behind the trees, waiting. Eventually I went inside. Didn't sleep much. The next day I bought a cheap motion camera off Amazon, the kind people use for deer trails. Set it up pointing toward the tree line. I even marked the exact time I turned it on. 9:05 p.m. It never caught anything. At 9:15, the garage doors started up again. Same pattern. I watched through the window. I saw the flash again too, same spot. But when I checked the footage later, there was nothing. Not even a blip. Just black trees. That was the last night the doors did it. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, nothing. Everyone's systems went back to normal. The HOA sent a follow-up saying a contractor's equipment may have inadvertently triggered multiple remotes, but they had no further concerns at this time. Randy never bought it. He still won't park in his garage, and I haven't moved that trail cam. It happened somewhere between Tucumcari and Amarillo, mid-October, around 3 a.m. I was hauling for a regional outfit out of Albuquerque back then, doing mostly overnight freight. Long stretches of nothing, just me and the rig and whatever came over the radio. This run was produced, headed eastbound on I-40, and I had a delivery window at a warehouse just outside Oklahoma City. I remember I had the windows cracked because the cab heater was acting up, blowing way too hot even on low. The air outside was cold and dry, just above freezing. Moon was out, but it was one of those thin ones that doesn't do much. Everything looked washed out. The asphalt, the signs, even the horizon. No color, no traffic either. That stretch can be dead quiet after midnight, and that night was no different. I was somewhere near the Texas line when the first light showed up. I didn't see it approach. It wasn't headlights coming up behind me. I would have seen those in the mirrors from miles off. It just sort of popped into view, right in the center mirror, like someone had turned on a bright LED flashlight and aimed it at the back of my trailer. It flared white for maybe a second, no more, then was gone. No fade in, no fade out, just there, then not. It startled me, but I figured maybe it was a reflection. Some weird angle of my own running lights bouncing off a road sign, or a flash of high beams from a car way behind me, even though I hadn't seen any in a while. 10 minutes later, I passed mile marker 227. That's when it got weird. About 20 or so minutes after that, I passed 227 again. I know that highway well. That sign should have been behind me. There's no turnarounds, no junctions that lead you back to the interstate without looping through a town. I hadn't taken any exits, hadn't slowed down. I even checked my GPS. It showed a steady eastward line, no deviations. I passed it again, and I knew it was the same one. It had a big dent in the post, like someone had backed into it with a trailer. I remembered seeing that earlier. Same exact bend. I slowed a little and turned down the radio. Something felt wrong. It wasn't just deja vu. It was like my brain knew I'd already done this exact thing, down to the pothole I hit just past the sign, the little shutter in the wheel. Then the light hit again, same place in the mirror. One bright flash, center of the rear view. Too bright for taillights. Too white for headlights. Just a flat, artificial glare like the sun coming off a windshield. No sound. No vehicles behind me. No change on the GPS. I kept driving. What else was I going to do? Another 20 minutes or so went by. I kept checking the mile markers, counting up 228, 229, 230. I let myself think maybe I'd imagined the repeat. Maybe I passed a temporary marker, one of those maintenance ones they stick in the ground during repairs. Then around 350, I passed 227 again. Same bend in the post, same pothole, same flash in the mirror not long after. I pulled over, hazards on, middle of nowhere, dead silence except for the ticking of the engine cooling. I got out and walked around the trailer. Tires were fine, latches secure, nothing dragging or flapping, no other vehicles in sight either direction. Just the road stretching flat in both directions and the distant silhouette of scrub brush and barbed wire fence. When I got back in the cab, the GPS still showed I was headed east. Same highway, no loops, no backtracking. Nothing to suggest I'd turned around, but I knew I had seen that same sign 3 times now. I kept driving, a little slower. The road didn't feel right after that. I started noticing things I couldn't explain. There was a patch of pavement that felt smoother than it should have, like it had just been poured. No road crew in sight. Then there were these 2 power poles off to the left, just barely visible in the dark, that looked like they were leaning inward toward each other, like they'd been warped or pulled. Another mile or 2 on, I passed a field that looked too perfect. I know that sounds dumb, but everything in it was symmetrical. The bushes, the fencing, even the way the grass looked under the moonlight, like someone had copied and pasted it a few times. It didn't look natural. Then, the 3rd flash. This time I felt it more than I saw it, like a heat behind my eyes. It showed up dead center in the rear view, flared out across the back window, and vanished. No follow-up. I braked hard and pulled onto the shoulder again. I sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing through my nose. Everything was quiet. No wind. No engine sounds except the low idle. Then my radio cut out. Not the station, the whole thing. The dash lights on the stereo went dark. It didn't even try to search for a signal, just dead. Then the dash clock froze, said 4:04 and didn't budge. I tapped it, thinking maybe I'd jostled something, but it stayed frozen. Engine still running fine, GPS still on, just the radio and clock both gone at once. I didn't move for maybe 10 minutes, just stared at the empty highway, waiting to see headlights, taillights, a police cruiser, anything. Nothing came. Eventually I eased back onto the road. The GPS map hadn't updated at all during the stop. It still showed me in motion, heading east, as if I hadn't pulled over at all. I thought maybe it glitched, but when I tapped it, the location marker jumped back to my current position, like it had just realized I'd stopped and started again. Another mile passed, then 2, then 5. No more flashes. No more repeat markers. Everything looked normal again. Old fence lines, faded signs, a dead armadillo in the left lane, stuff that actually made sense. I didn't breathe easy until I passed mile marker 235. New number. No dent. No deja vu. The radio came back on at 4:37. No static or warm-up. It just snapped back in with a song mid-play. Clock blinked once, then corrected itself. No explanation. I made the delivery just after 7. Didn't say anything to the dock guys. Didn't mention it to dispatch. I wasn't even sure how to start that conversation. Next time I ran that route, a week later, I checked for that mile marker. 227 was right where I remembered it. Same dent in the post. I passed it once, like normal, and kept going. No lights, no flashes, no weird fields or warped poles. But now, every time I'm on that stretch, I watch the mirror like a hawk. I keep the GPS zoomed in. I mark every mile in my head, because I know what I saw, I know what I didn't imagine, and I still don't understand how I passed the same sign 3 times without ever turning around. It started about a month after I moved into the house on Ridgeview. Just a little place on the edge of town, nothing fancy. I bought it cheap because the backyard fence was falling apart and the deck was rotting through in spots, but it had a wide open sky behind it. No streetlights, no big trees, just a long sloping field that dipped down into scrub brush and dry creek bed. Perfect for stargazing. I'd been into that stuff since I was a kid. Not in a serious astronomy way, I couldn't tell you the name of more than a handful of constellations, but I liked looking up. But I liked me down. It calmed me down, especially after a long day. I'd sit out with a blanket and just stare at the sky until my neck got sore. The night it started was clear. No moon, maybe 60 degrees. The air felt dry and still. I brought out my telescope, the cheap one I'd had since college, and set it up on the cracked concrete slab behind the house. I had a small folding chair and a thermos of decaf. Typical Tuesday night stuff. Around 10:15, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a satellite, just a little pinprick of light, faint but steady. But it didn't move. I waited a minute. Still didn't move. Then it blinked. Once. Just a sharp little pulse. Then nothing. I kept staring, and exactly 23 seconds later, it blinked again. I started counting between pulses. 1,000, 1,000. I used the stopwatch on my phone. It was dead on every time, 23 seconds between each blink. No variation. I watched it do this for about 15 minutes straight. I tried to lock onto it with the telescope, but the second I moved to adjust the focus, I lost track of it. Couldn't get it again. Eventually, I gave up and went inside. I figured maybe it was some kind of tower or aircraft way out in the distance, even though I knew it wasn't. It was too high, too faint. But I let it go. The next night, it was back. Same exact spot, same exact blink. Every 23 seconds, like clockwork. I tried using a sky mapping app on my phone to see what should be there, some star or satellite, but nothing showed up in that part of the sky. It was just blank space. A gap between constellations. I even Googled the coordinates I guessed it might be near, and still nothing. I started watching for it every night. It never missed. Always started blinking sometime after 10 p.m., always stopped around 2 a.m., sometimes a little earlier, but never later. I tried to photograph it with my phone, but it was too faint. Even when I used a long exposure app, the dot didn't show up. Just stars. No blinking light. One night I had a couple people over, Eric and Sam, two friends from work. We were hanging out on the back steps, drinking cheap beer and half listening to music from my phone. I pointed the light out to them. There, I said. Just wait. It blinks. We waited. It blinked. I looked at them. Eric squinted. I didn't see anything, he said. Sam shook her head. Where? I pointed again, using the tip of my finger against the sky to line it up with the corner of the fence and the edge of the neighbor's barn roof. Right there. Wait. 23 seconds. We stared. It blinked. Nothing. I think your eyes are playing tricks, Eric said. I felt cold all of a sudden, even though the air was warm. I tried to laugh it off. Seriously? You don't see that? They both kind of smiled and shrugged it off like I was pulling their leg, and we moved on. But I kept checking. All night. The light kept blinking. That's when I realized only I could see it. I tried the telescope again the next night. I lined it up as close as I could, trying to freeze the blink in the lens, but it never worked. Even when I had the coordinates dialed in, the thing wouldn't appear in the scope. Just empty blackness and stars. After a while, I stopped trying to show anyone else. I just accepted it. Every night after 10, I'd sit out there and watch it blink. I started to time it precisely. It was never off. Never early, never late. Not even by a fraction of a second. One night, I set an alarm and went out right at 2:10 a.m. I wanted to see if it would still be there. It wasn't. Not even a fade out. Just gone. A few weeks later, I noticed something else. The blinking had shifted. It wasn't in the same spot anymore. It was maybe 2 fingers to the left of where it used to be, just slightly lower in the sky. At first, I thought it was seasonal. Maybe the stars had rotated and I just hadn't noticed. But when I looked up at the constellations I did know, they hadn't moved that much. Only the blinking light had. And then it moved again, a few nights later. Same distance, same direction, like it was traveling on a slow arc. That started bothering me more than I expected, because if it was drifting and no one else could see it, not even with the telescope, then I couldn't pin it down, couldn't predict it. I started having this weird, anxious feeling around 10 p.m. every night, waiting to see where it would be next. It never blinked in more than one place at a time. It wasn't like a series of lights or something circling the Earth. Just the same single point, slightly relocated, always blinking every 23 seconds. One night, I tried to ignore it. I turned off all the lights and sat in the living room with the blinds shut, watching TV with the volume way up. But I could still feel it out there, like an itch behind my eyes. I caved and went outside. It blinked. Closer now. A good inch or two farther across the sky than before. Maybe higher. That was the night I realized something else had changed. The moment I stepped outside, the cicadas stopped. Just gone, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood on the back steps for a second, listening. No bugs, no wind. The dog next door, Harvey, usually barked at everything, squirrels, passing cars, but he was silent. I looked at the light. It blinked. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. I suddenly felt this tightness in my chest, like I'd just missed a step on the stairs. Not panic exactly. More like something in me had noticed something before my brain caught up. I turned to go back inside, and the moment my hand touched the door, the bugs started up again. Like the world unpaused. I froze, then looked over my shoulder. The light blinked. I didn't sleep well after that. I started keeping the bedroom curtains shut and used a sleep mask, but it didn't help. I kept dreaming of standing outside, watching that light blink. Sometimes I dreamed it got faster, or that it was blinking a message I couldn't understand. I know how that sounds. I'm not saying that's what was happening, but it felt like it was doing something intentional. A few nights ago, I went out one last time. I don't even know why. I think I just wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't real, that I'd imagined it, or that it had stopped. But it was still there, even closer now. Not overhead, but heading that way, maybe 20 degrees off vertical. I stood there, arms crossed, staring at it. I tried not to blink. I wanted to catch it, catch anything. A change, a flicker, a glitch. It blinked. The moment it did, the porch light behind me flickered, just once. Then went out. The bulb was new. I'd changed it a week before. I didn't move. The cicadas had stopped again. I turned around and tried the porch light switch. Nothing. I turned back. Blink. I watched it blink 3 more times, counting the seconds exactly. Still 23. Still perfect. Still just me. Then I went inside, locked every door, and haven't gone out after dark since. But I can still see it from my bedroom window if I angle the blinds just right. I try not to look. I try. But I know it's still blinking, and I know it's getting closer. I'd pulled off onto the overlook around 9:30. That stretch of Route 219 runs through the Allegheny Mountains, and I used to drive it a lot coming back from my dad's place in Millersville. It's mostly curves and pines and not much else once you're north of town, but there's a turnout about 10 miles up that gives a nice view of the valley. I stopped there sometimes when I didn't feel like going home just yet. That night was quiet, early April, a little chilly but clear. You could see your breath outside, and the moon was low and orange, kind of hiding behind some streaky clouds. I parked facing the edge, killed the engine, and rolled the window down. Didn't plan to stay long, just wanted to breathe some air that didn't smell like coffee or old cigarettes. There's no cell reception up there, which I've always liked. Just a narrow 2-lane road and the wind through trees. I was sitting there maybe 15 minutes, just watching the treetops shift in the breeze, when I caught headlights behind me in the mirror. I figured someone else was pulling in. The lights came around the bend slow, just the way you'd expect, bouncing a little from the uneven pavement. I watched them move up the road, steady and normal. It's a short stretch, about 100 yards from the bend to the turnout, and I waited for them to appear behind me, maybe park alongside. But they didn't. The lights kept shining, getting closer, but the car never came around the curve. They just hovered there, like the vehicle was stuck just out of sight. I craned my neck and looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing. Just the glow, still angled like it was mid-turn, low and golden like any pair of halogens. I thought maybe the driver had stopped in the lane. I turned off the interior light and sat still, figuring I'd wait until they passed or pulled in. But after another minute or so, the lights started to dim. Not flicker, dim, like someone was turning a dial down slowly. They faded until they were gone completely, and the bend behind me was just dark again. I waited. No sound. No engine, no gravel crunching, nothing. I got out of the truck and walked toward the back, figuring I'd hear something once I stepped out, but it was dead quiet except for the wind in the trees. I stood there a while, listening. Didn't even hear any birds. Eventually I got back in and shut the door. Locked it too. Not sure why. I didn't feel scared exactly, just wired. Like my body had picked up on something my brain hadn't caught yet. After maybe 5 minutes, I turned the truck back on and kept driving north. I didn't see another car the whole rest of the way home. A few days later, I drove back out during the day just to see the spot again. I kept thinking maybe I'd find some fresh tire marks or something out of place, but it looked exactly the same. The road was dry, the turnout was empty, nothing unusual. I mentioned it to my brother Cal just casually while we were working on his fence. He said it was probably someone playing around with a spotlight or hiding off the side, but the road's narrow and there's no shoulder. No way to pull off without ending up in the brush. And even if someone wanted to prank a random driver at a turnout at night, why do it silently and then vanish? I stopped going out there after dark for a while. Took the longer route home through Johnstown instead. I don't really believe in anything weird, not like that, but I also can't explain why I never heard a car or saw it pass. Whatever it was, those lights looked real. But there was no car. It was just past midnight when I first heard it. The clicking. Soft, rhythmic, almost like someone tapping their nails very gently on the outside of the window pane. I was lying in bed, half awake, half dozing off. My apartment's on the second floor, overlooking the alley behind the building. Usually the alley is quiet at night, except for the occasional stray cat or the distant hum of a car on the main road. But this clicking wasn't normal. It wasn't the usual background noise. It was steady, deliberate, and it felt like it was coming right up against the window. I lay there for a minute, listening, trying to convince myself it was just something mundane, maybe a branch brushing against the glass or a loose shutter flapping in the wind. But the wind had died down hours ago, and the trees around my building weren't near that side. The sound stopped the second I reached over to pull the blinds up. I stared out into the alley, but there was nothing there, just the dim light from the street lamp casting long, lazy shadows. No one, no movement. Then, without warning, the whole apartment went black. The power cut out. At first, I thought it was a fuse or a blown breaker, but it was total blackout. No emergency lights, no electronics, no street lights outside either. The silence was immediate, thick and deep, as if the world had been paused. I checked my phone. No signal, no power, nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it went out, everything flickered back on. 11 seconds, according to my internal clock. No longer, no shorter. I sat up in bed, heart racing, trying to make sense of it. The clicking was gone and the power was back, but something about it felt off, like I'd been watched. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on that window, waiting for the clicking to return, but it didn't. I even left the blinds open overnight a couple of times, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was, but nothing. Still, the feeling lingered. Every time I passed by that window during the day, I felt like something was just beyond my sight, something waiting. One night, I heard the clicking again, same soft rhythm, but this time I didn't pull the blinds. I just sat in the dark and listened. The clicking stopped again as soon as I touched the window, but no blackout followed. I'm still not sure what I heard or why the power went out that night, just that it happened and that for a moment, the world felt not quite right. It happened 2 years ago on a back road about 20 minutes outside Fort Stockton, Texas. I was heading home from a welding job in Alpine. It was one of those long, hot September days that hangs on like summer doesn't want to die. I'd stayed late helping my buddy Casey clean up the site, so by the time I hit the highway, the sun had dipped behind the mountains and the air was thick and orange. I usually take 67 up, but that night I cut across this little farm road, RM 1776, because I didn't feel like dealing with truckers on the main route. That road's straight and quiet, barely any houses, just mesquite trees and dust and old fences that look like they've been losing fights with cows for decades. I had the windows down and the radio was off. Just the hum of the tires and the chirp of bugs. I was sipping the last of a warm Gatorade when I saw a car parked on the shoulder ahead. A silver sedan looked like an older Camry. No hazard lights on, just idling there with all four doors shut. I slowed a little, expecting someone to be changing a tire or maybe flagging me down. But as I passed, I saw the people inside. 4 of them, 2 in front, 2 in back, just sitting completely still. They were all looking straight up, not just heads tilted. I mean, straight up, mouths hanging open like something was directly above them. Their eyes were wide, really wide, but they didn't blink or move at all. I passed them in maybe 2 seconds, but it hit me hard. My first reaction was that something was wrong, like carbon monoxide poisoning or a stroke or some kind of seizure. But the engine was running, no smoke. The car was clean and new looking, no damage. I pulled over about 100 yards up, sat there for a few seconds with my hazards on, trying to decide if I should back up or walk over. But something about it just froze me. I kept thinking, what if they all look at me at once? Or what if I open the door and they don't respond at all? I don't know why, but I drove off. I hated myself for it. I told myself I'd call someone when I got a signal again, but even that felt like a lie. About 10 minutes later, my dog started whining in the back seat. Lula's a mutt, some kind of shepherd mix. Tough as nails, usually quiet, but she was pacing and making this low, anxious sound. I looked back to calm her down, and that's when I noticed it. All the ranch gates were open. That road cuts past 4 or 5 properties, and they've all got those same metal swing gates with cattle guards. I've been driving that route for years, and I never see those gates wide open. Not once. But every single one of them was standing open, chains swinging loose in the breeze. The fields were empty. No cattle, no horses, just dry grass and dirt. I slowed down to maybe 20, trying to get a better look. There was a weird silence too, like the insects had stopped. No crickets, no cicadas. I turned the radio on, static, switched stations, static on all of them, even the Spanish channel from Presidio, which never cuts out. That's when I saw the lights, not headlights, not planes. These were slow, round lights, way up in the sky, but too low to be stars. 3 of them, soft orange-white, moving in a triangle, perfectly spaced. They weren't blinking, they weren't speeding or darting, just moving, slow and steady. I stopped the truck completely and got out. Lula barked sharp and panicked and tried to squeeze into the front seat. I looked up, and I swear those lights stopped moving. Like they noticed me. Just hung there. I watched for a long time. Might have been 5 minutes, might have been 20. I couldn't tell. My legs were shaking, and my mouth was dry like I'd been chewing cotton. Then I saw headlights behind me. I turned around fast, thinking maybe someone had followed me, but it was just a pickup maybe a mile back coming fast. I flagged it down, and it pulled up next to me. Old guy, late 60s, gray mustache, looked like a rancher. I asked if he'd seen the sedan back there with the people inside. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language, said he'd just come that way, hadn't passed a single car. I told him exactly where I'd seen it. He said no, he swore on his life, nothing was there. I didn't argue. I thanked him and got back in the truck. I drove the rest of the way home going 75, didn't stop for anything. Lula curled up on the seat beside me and didn't move the whole way. When I got home, I checked my dash cam. It had been recording, like always, except it wasn't. The file from that exact stretch of road, from just before I passed the parked car to when I saw the rancher's headlights, was corrupted. Just blank. No footage, no audio. Everything before and after was fine. I checked the GPS log. There was a gap in the signal, just over 10 minutes where the truck's location didn't update, like I'd blinked off the map. I told Casey about it the next day. He laughed at first, but when I mentioned the triangle lights, he got quiet. Said he saw something like that over the Davis Mountains once, years ago, but never talked about it. I drove that road again a week later. In daylight, just to see. No sign of the Camry, no tire tracks, no marks in the dirt where it would have been parked. All the ranch gates were closed, chained tight. Every time I think about it, I try to explain it away. Glare on the windshield, tired brain, maybe heat exhaustion. But I wasn't hallucinating. I saw their faces. I remember how wide their mouths were, how still they were, like statues, and whatever they were looking at, I think it saw me too. I saw them on a Tuesday morning, early spring, driving east on Route 212 just outside Catawba. That stretch of road cuts through low pasture land, so you can see a long way in every direction once the sun starts coming up. I leave the house around 5:15 most days, give or take, just early enough that it's still dark, but with the horizon starting to lighten. That morning was clear, cold, around 40, and the fields had that silver look from frost. I had the heat cranked in the car and one hand wrapped around my travel mug, just like always. I was maybe 10 minutes into the drive past the last grouping of houses when I noticed the lights. 3 of them. Bright white. They weren't moving. Just hanging in the sky above the tree line on the left side of the road. Perfectly spaced, like someone had stuck 3 dots on a ruler and tilted it slightly. At first I thought it was a tower. There's a wind farm about 30 miles out, but that's nowhere near this stretch. Then I thought maybe a plane, but they weren't blinking, and they weren't moving. I slowed down, pulled to the gravel shoulder, and turned down the radio. The lights didn't shift. They didn't even flicker. I watched them for about 30 seconds, then reached for my phone. I leaned across the passenger seat to get a better angle through the windshield and recorded maybe 10 seconds of video. It was weird, but I figured I'd look at it later, see if I was just catching a weird reflection or something. I kept driving, had to get to the plant by 6, checked the mirror a few times, and the lights were still there for another mile or so, then gone. Didn't think much of it until break. Around 9:30, I stepped outside and pulled up the video. Nothing, just the empty sky. The trees were there, the same stretch of road, the glow on the horizon from the sunrise, but no lights. I scrubbed through the clip twice, thought maybe I'd been pointing too low, but I'd aimed right at them. I remember lining them up with the top corner of the windshield. I remember zooming slightly. There was no blur, no pixelation. It was just like they hadn't been there at all. I figured maybe I was remembering it wrong. Maybe I'd imagined it, except when I zoomed in on one frame, I could see the reflection of 3 bright dots on the hood of my car. That's what got me. The lights weren't in the sky in the video, but their reflections were still visible on the metal. Later that day, I told Tony, the guy I carpool with sometimes. He said maybe it was headlights from a hill or an aerial refueling op, something mundane. I said sure, yeah, probably. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Next morning, same route, same time. I had my phone ready, just in case. Nothing. Clear sky. No lights. On Thursday, they were back. Same place in the sky, same position. 3 dots, slightly tilted. I pulled over again, tried recording from 2 angles, through the windshield, then out the driver's side window. I even stepped out of the car for a few seconds. There was no sound, no engine hum, no chopper blades, no wind. Just the soft hiss of the tires cooling and a few birds off in the trees. Again, they didn't move. They didn't fade or shift or react. I watched them until I was almost late. Back at work, I checked both videos. Same thing, no lights. The trees, the early dawn glow, even the little smudge of pollen on the windshield showed up clearly. But no lights. One clip, again, had the faintest dot-shaped glints reflecting on the car hood. Not as clear as before, but they were there. I stopped showing people after that. No one really cared, and I didn't feel like being the guy chasing ghosts on his morning commute. But I kept watching. Over the next 3 weeks, I saw them 5 more times. Never on consecutive days. Never in bad weather. Always right before sunrise. Always in the same spot. I tried filming every angle I could think of. Dash cam, rear view mirror, even stuck my phone out the window once, half frozen. Every video came back clean, like the sky had been empty the whole time. But my eyes said otherwise. And then there was the night I woke up at 2 a.m. with my phone light on. Just the lock screen, not a notification or call. I thought maybe I'd rolled over onto it, but it was sitting on the dresser across the room. The next morning, the phone was dead. Wouldn't charge. I had to swap out the battery at a repair place downtown. When I finally got it working again, the first 2 videos I took of the lights were gone. Just those 2. The rest of my photos were still there. Even older stuff. Vacations, random screenshots, dog pictures, all intact. Just those 2 clips, missing like they'd never existed. On April 17th, I tried bringing my old Canon, one of those compact digital cameras I hadn't used in years. Charged it overnight, formatted the card. When I saw the lights, I pulled over and took 3 stills and a short video. All 3 photos came out black. Just solid black squares, like the shutter hadn't opened. The video file wouldn't play at all. It showed up on the card, had a timestamp and file size, but nothing would open it. Not on the camera, not on my laptop. That was the last time I saw them. I kept checking for the next 2 months. Every day, same route, same time. Nothing. Just morning frost and sunrises, and the same cracked stretch of asphalt I'd driven 100 times. I deleted the videos eventually, the ones that didn't show anything. I figured if I ever looked too closely, tried to enhance or clean up the reflections, I'd just be chasing shadows. And the more I thought about it, the more I didn't want to know if something was buried in those pixels. I stopped pulling over, stopped checking the sky. It's better that way. I get to work on time now. The power went out just after 9 p.m. in Harlan, a small town nestled between rolling hills and thick woods in eastern Kentucky. I remember because I'd just finished the dishes and the kitchen clock blinked 12 like it always did after a power failure. But this time, the blackout wasn't your usual quick glitch. It stretched on, and weirdly, nothing in the house worked. Not the clocks, not the stove, not even my old battery-powered radio. At first, I thought maybe it was just my place, but a glance out the window told me otherwise. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no headlights on passing cars. Even the distant glow from the cell tower blinked out. It was silent in a way I hadn't felt before. My dog, Buster, a scruffy little mutt I'd rescued a year earlier, got restless. He paced around the living room, low whining. I tried turning on the flashlight on my phone, but it just blacked out like everything else. I glanced at the wall clock in the hallway. It wasn't moving, not a single tick or secondhand movement. The silence was so complete, it felt like time had just stopped. I checked my watch. It was dead too. My mind started racing. I went outside for a cigarette, stepping onto the porch. The night air was unusually still, no breeze, no rustle in the trees. The stars were sharp and clear, but somehow looked different, like someone had turned down their brightness and added a subtle haze. I waved down my neighbor, Roy. He was standing in his driveway, arms crossed, staring up at the sky with this odd blank expression. "Roy, you got power?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Nothing. All dead." His voice was quiet, like he was trying not to panic. We both stood there, looking around. After maybe 10 minutes, I went back inside and tried the landline phone. No dial tone. Same with my old cordless phone. Nothing worked. The weird thing was, my watch and the clocks, digital or analog, they weren't just off. They weren't moving at all. Not a tick, not a blink. It was like they'd frozen, stopped dead in time. I checked the stove clock again, same time as when the power cut out. I kept glancing at it, hoping to see movement, but nothing. The blackout lasted about 45 minutes-ish, though it felt much longer. When the power finally flickered back on, it came on with that low hum, and then all the clocks flashed 9:47 p.m. But here's the thing. None of us felt like 45 minutes had passed. Everyone I talked to said it felt more like a few minutes, or even no time at all. The day after, the town was buzzing. Phones worked again, the traffic lights were blinking, but something felt off. People were tired and a little dazed. I overheard Mrs. Nefries Callahan at the grocery store telling her son how her wall clock had stopped completely during the blackout, and then started again, exactly where it left off. Everyone's devices acted the same, but what really got to me was how many people started talking about this strange dream. It wasn't just one or two. It was half the town, I swear. Same dream. People swore they dreamed about a big, featureless field under a dim sky, with nothing but a faint low hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Some said they saw a pale glow hovering just above the ground. Others described feeling watched, but couldn't see who or what was watching. I didn't want to believe it was some mass hallucination or a prank, but it wasn't like those dreams you can just brush off. They were vivid and left this cold emptiness in the chest when people woke up. Emily, who runs the diner, told me she woke up sweating, her heart pounding. She said she felt like she'd been waiting for something that never came. Buster wouldn't go near the backyard for days. He'd growl at the wood's edge, staring into the dark like something was out there, but I never saw anything. A few others said their phones glitched, showing static or weird symbols on the screen for a second when the power came back, but no one could explain what they meant. I started noticing that my own watch, even after the power returned, ran a bit slow, like it was struggling to catch up. I tried resetting it, but it just lagged again. I joked about it to my wife, Claire, but she was too quiet. She said her dreams were worse, like something was crawling just beneath her skin, watching her sleep. No one talked about it openly like we're supposed to. It was like this thing happened, then we all agreed to act normal. But every time I walk past the clock in the kitchen, it makes me think of that night, the way it froze and how long the silence stretched. I don't know what caused the blackout or why all those clocks stopped dead or why so many people dreamed the same strange thing right after. It's just one of those things that settled in the back of my mind, like an itch you can't reach. Sometimes when I'm alone and it's quiet, I swear I can hear that low hum from the dream, just under the hum of everyday life. I camp alone a lot, mostly up in the Sawtooths when work's slow. I run deliveries out of Boise and pick my own hours, so sometimes I'll take a weekday and head into the hills just to be away from pavement and voices for a bit. No big hikes or anything. Just a tent, my pack, and my dog, Winslow. He's a shepherd mix, real smart, real chill, doesn't bark unless it matters. This happened last September. I'd gone up Tuesday morning and parked at a pull-off off Forest Road 212, about 4 miles past where it turns to gravel. There's a little creek down a ravine and a flat patch next to it where I've pitched a tent maybe half a dozen times. Cell signal dies about 10 minutes past the trailhead, which is exactly why I like it. That night was cool, but not cold. Clear skies, no wind. I'd brought freeze-dried stew and my little cook pot, and Winslow and I ate by the fire. Around 10, I doused it and crawled into the tent. He curled up by the door like he always does. I remember checking the time before I crashed. It was 10:14. Phone battery was at 82%. The next thing I remember clearly is unzipping the tent just after sunrise. Winslow was already sitting up, real alert. Ears forward, not tense exactly, but focused. He stepped out ahead of me and stared off toward the tree line like he'd heard something. I didn't hear anything. I stepped out, stretched, took a leak behind a log, felt normal. Cold dew, birds, distant wind, everything looked how I left it, except the fire pit. I always scatter the coals with water and ash, but that morning the rocks around it looked wrong, like someone had moved them slightly and put them back. There were wet streaks on 2 of the stones, not from dew, more like smears. I knelt and touched one. It wasn't warm or anything, just odd. Off-center from how I'd arranged it. I didn't think too much of it right then. Figured maybe I'd just not been as precise as I remembered. I went to grab my phone to check the time again. It was off. That surprised me. I hit the button, nothing. Dead screen. I held power. Still nothing. I carry a battery bank and a solar panel for longer trips, but this was just an overnighter, so I hadn't packed one. I figured maybe it had glitched, or the cold drained it. Annoying, but not a crisis. I made coffee and sat by the creek while Winslow sniffed around the brush, still acting a little stiff. Not scared, just cautious. He didn't range far. I packed up around 9, rolled the tent, lashed it up, double-checked I hadn't left anything. The only thing that kept tugging at me was the fire pit, but again, I chalked it up to my own memory. It wasn't until I got home, 2 hours later, after getting back in range, that things really started to bother me. I plugged my phone in and it powered up fine. No low battery warning, just booted like normal, but instead of 82%, it showed 78%, which made no sense. It should have dropped, not gone up. I unlocked it. Everything looked normal, until I opened my camera roll. There were 57 new photos, all taken between 1:12 and 3:40 a.m. They were all from inside the tent. Every single one was blurry, like motion blur, low light, shaky hand type of blurry. Some were just dark shapes, walls of the tent, sleeping bag fabric, shadows. Others had faint glows as like light coming through the nylon from outside. A few had what looked like a hand, too close to the lens, pale and out of focus, like someone brushing against it. None of them were clear. None had me in them, just shapes, parts of Winslow's body, his side, his tail, nothing direct. The last photo, timestamped 3:40, was the only one not completely smeared. It showed the zipper flap, partly open, a sliver of darkness beyond it, and what looked like something smooth and round, maybe the size of a melon, just outside. Too dark to tell. Could have been a rock. Could have been a face. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch and looked through the pictures over and over, trying to figure out what I was seeing. I showed a couple to my friend Eli, who's into photography. He said it looked like someone was fumbling with the phone in the dark, trying to take pictures without knowing how it worked. The angles were weird, like it was flat on the ground half the time, pointed up. I asked if he thought I took them in my sleep. He just looked at me and said, "Why would you open your tent at 3 in the morning?" I didn't have an answer. 2 days later, I went back to that spot during daylight just to check. I took Winslow and brought a friend this time. We didn't camp, just hiked in, looked around, didn't find anything unusual. But about 50 yards up the slope from where I'd pitched the tent, we found a line of indentations in the moss. 5 or 6 of them, maybe 1.5 feet apart. Not deep, not shaped like boot prints, more like pressure points. Narrow, evenly spaced, almost too even. Winslow sniffed them and backed off. Didn't growl, didn't bark, just turned around and walked back toward the trail. That was enough for me. I don't camp alone anymore. I was out walking my dog, an old border collie named Clover, one chilly October night in my neighborhood on the edge of Portland. It had been raining all day, and the streets were slick and shiny under the streetlights. The air was damp and smelled like wet leaves and pine. Clover and I usually took the same loop every night, a couple miles through quiet streets, past some older houses with yards full of untrimmed bushes, then a stretch of forest trail at the end. That night, everything felt normal at first. Clover was tugging on the leash, sniffing every lamppost and patch of grass like usual. I was half listening to a podcast, half lost in thought. It was close to 9 p.m. and there wasn't much traffic, just a few cars now and then. Then, near the entrance to the forest trail, Clover suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. She stiffened up like someone hit the pause button, ears pricked, tail low but stiff. I called her name softly, but she didn't move. She was staring straight up into the sky, eyes wide and fixed on something I couldn't see at first. I looked up, scanning the dark sky behind the thick canopy of tall pines. It was mostly cloudy, but there was this one weird patch where the clouds parted, showing a pale gray circle of light. Not like the moon, too dull and too round, almost like a dim spotlight hanging there. It didn't blink or change shape, but it didn't look natural. Clover wouldn't budge. I tugged gently on the leash, but she was rooted. I crouched down and tried to call her again. Still nothing. Her breathing had slowed, and her whole body was tense, like she was watching something she couldn't take her eyes off. I started to feel this creeping unease. It was one of those moments where something about the air changes, but you can't put your finger on why. The forest was so quiet you could hear the wet leaves settling on the ground. No bugs, no wind, no distant traffic, just this weird silence. After a minute or two of this, I finally pulled Clover back toward the street, dragging her half-limp body with me. She didn't resist, but didn't want to walk on her own either. Her eyes stayed fixed upward the entire time. When we got back into the neighborhood, she started acting more normal again, sniffing the ground, looking around like nothing happened. But I kept glancing up at that spot in the sky. The pale light was still there, just hanging, steady and unblinking. On the way home, I noticed that the streetlights near the forest edge were flickering a bit, like their bulbs were about to go out. I assumed it was just the weather or a power glitch, but the timing felt off. I'd never seen all of them flicker like that before. When I got inside, Clover immediately jumped on the couch and curled up like nothing had happened. I checked the clock. It was exactly 9:13 p.m. I spent the rest of the night half watching the windows, half listening for sounds outside, but nothing came. No cars, no footsteps, no animal noises, just the occasional drip of water from the gutters. The next morning, I told a few neighbors about it, figuring maybe someone else had noticed something weird in the sky. Nobody had. Some said they'd heard a plane fly over earlier, but nothing unusual. I tried to look up weather reports, atmospheric conditions, anything that might explain that strange light. Nothing. Over the next few days, Clover kept acting strange whenever we walked near that part of the trail. She'd stop and stare up, ears forward, stiffen like before. No barking, no growling, just this frozen attention on that one spot. One afternoon, I went back alone to the trail during daylight to see if I could spot anything. The patch of forest was quiet but unremarkable. No signs, no weird markings, no ground disturbances. I set my phone to record video and tried to get a clip of the spot in the sky where Clover had been staring. But in the daylight, there was nothing unusual at all, just a break in the clouds, the usual pale gray. Later that week, I found that my phone's clock and a few apps were slightly off by a couple of minutes, but only during certain times, mostly late evening. At first, I thought it was just a glitch or low signal, but it kept happening every night around 9 p.m. That's when I started feeling like something was watching us. Not just Clover, but me too. Nothing visible, just this presence. Every time I was outside at night near that trail, I'd get this feeling like I was being followed, but when I looked back, there was never anyone there. One evening, after a long day at work, I went out for a quick walk with Clover around 8:45 p.m. The clouds were thick and the rain had started again, light and steady. We reached the trail entrance and right on schedule, Clover froze again. This time, when I looked up, the light was gone. But the forest felt different. The wind had picked up, rustling the pine needles loudly, and the silence was broken by this faint, low hum, almost electronic, but distant and pulsing. I pulled Clover toward home as quickly as I could. She was trembling slightly, which I hadn't seen before. When we got inside, I closed all the windows and doors, sat down with her, and tried to shake off the weird feeling. I checked the clock. It read 9:02 p.m. The time was off again. I don't know what we saw that night or what Clover sensed, but it's been with me ever since. I stopped taking that trail after dark. Clover still doesn't like that part of the neighborhood, and sometimes I swear she's watching something invisible, just waiting. Nothing about it makes sense, and I'm not sure I want it to, but I keep thinking about that pale light frozen in the sky and the way everything just paused for a moment, like something was there but only just out of reach. I don't usually bring my camera camping. I'm not exactly a nature photographer or anything like that, but last summer I decided to try it out for fun. I was up near the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, alone except for my dog, a black lab named Rigsby. We had this small clearing by a lake, surrounded by thick pine and spruce. It was late July, and the nights were warm but still crisp enough that you wanted a jacket by midnight. I'd set up my tent and spent the afternoon hiking a couple miles down a trail that curls around the lake. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual birds, bugs, and the occasional splash from fish. When I got back, I unpacked my camera and tripod, figuring I'd try some night shots of the stars since the sky there is so clear. Around 10:30, I settled by the shore, set up the tripod, and started snapping some long exposures. I was just playing around, trying to capture the Milky Way, maybe some star trails. Rigsby lay curled up nearby, occasionally flicking his ears at some distant animal sounds. I remember checking the screen between shots, satisfied that the camera was picking up the stars crisp and clear. The lake was calm, and the only light was from the stars and a faint orange glow on the horizon where the sun had just dipped below the trees. I was about to pack up when I noticed something odd. I'd taken a long exposure shot for maybe 30 seconds or so, then checked it. The stars looked right, but there was this series of tiny lights moving in a zigzag pattern across the frame, like a string of dots forming a sort of sideways W, then dipping down, then back up again. It didn't match any star trails or planes. I looked up. The sky was empty. No blinking lights, no aircraft, nothing moving at all. I shrugged and figured maybe it was some kind of reflection or insect close to the lens. So I took another shot, this time for 45 seconds. The same pattern appeared again, almost identical. Those small, sharp points of light weaving in that same zigzag path across the dark sky. I called out to Rigsby, "You seeing this, boy?" He lifted his head, ears twitching, but didn't move. He seemed calm. I took another shot, just to be sure, then sat back and stared at the screen. The more I looked, the more unsettled I felt. The lights were perfectly spaced, almost like they were following a deliberate path, but nothing I could see in real life was moving that way. I kept the camera on the tripod and set it for a 2-minute exposure. I sat on a log and waited, watching the sky. It was so quiet, only the soft rustling of the trees and Rigsby's breathing beside me. When the shot finished, I checked it on the screen. The same zigzag pattern was there. Longer now, stretched across the frame. Nothing like a plane or satellite path I'd ever seen. No blinking red or white lights, no steady beam. That's when I noticed the feeling in the air had shifted. The usual summer night sounds were muted. No frogs, no insects, nothing. It was like the forest had gone completely still. I stood up slowly, scanning the tree line. The shadows seemed thicker, darker, and the sky seemed quieter than before. Rigsby stood with me, ears forward, body tense. I started packing up my gear, but just as I was about to zip up the camera bag, I caught a glimpse of something low in the trees. It wasn't a figure or an animal, just a faint glow, pale, bluish, flickering. I squinted, but it disappeared as soon as I blinked. I told myself it was just a flashlight, or maybe the neighbor camper's fire reflecting, but the campsite was deserted around me. I didn't sleep much that night. Rigsby stayed close, growling softly once or twice at something I couldn't see. The next morning, I looked over the shots again on my laptop. The zigzag lights were unmistakable. They weren't random or natural, but I still had no clue what they were or why I hadn't seen a thing with my eyes. I showed a few photos to a friend who's into astronomy. He said maybe satellites or drones, but the pattern didn't fit any known flight paths. He suggested it could be some kind of light distortion or maybe bugs catching the lens's reflection, but that didn't explain why the pattern was so precise or why the forest had gone dead silent during the long exposures. I've gone back to that spot a few times since, camera in tow, hoping to catch the lights again. Nothing. The nights are normal, full of stars and the usual sounds. No zigzag lights, no strange silence. I don't know if it was something out there or just a trick of the camera and my tired brain, but looking back, that night felt different. Like something unseen was moving just beyond what my eyes could catch, weaving quietly through the sky. I was hiking alone in the Allegheny National Forest, early October of last year. I'd taken a week off work to get away from people, no real destination, just following trails and making camp where it felt right. I don't usually do solo hikes that deep, but it had been a rough couple of months and I needed the quiet. I started at the Minister Creek trailhead, but after the first day, I broke off from the loop and just kept heading north along the ridge. Not smart, I know, but I had a good map, plenty of supplies, and I'd told my brother Nate where I'd be. I wasn't really worried. Weather was cool, dry, perfect for hiking. The third night out, I made camp near a rock outcropping overlooking a valley. It was one of those spots that makes the whole hike worth it. Soft, mossy ground, a little spring nearby, and nothing man-made in sight. I set up my tent, cooked some rice and beans, and watched the sun drop behind the trees with my dog, Opal, curled up by my boots. Opal's a cattle dog mix I've had since college. Not much of a barker, but sharp. She's warned me off bears twice and once kept a raccoon from getting into my food bag. That night, though, she was weirdly restless. She kept sniffing the air and turning in slow circles like she was waiting for something. I figured it was a deer nearby, or maybe it was just antsy from the long hike. Around 9:30, I climbed into the tent and tried to read by headlamp, but I kept zoning out. Everything was just too quiet. Normally you hear things out there, crickets, owls, wind moving through the leaves. That night was dead silent, like someone had pressed pause on the woods. At one point, I turned off the light just to listen. Nothing. No breeze, no rustle, just stillness. Even Opal had stopped shifting around. She was sitting up now, ears forward, staring at the tent wall like she could see through it. Then the light started. I didn't hear it coming. No hum, no footsteps, just a glow that began to pulse against the nylon of the tent, faint at first, like distant lightning. I unzipped the flap and looked out. At first, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Everything looked the same: trees, rocks, the slope of the valley. But then I saw it, floating maybe 20 feet above the treetops on the opposite ridge, a single orb of light. Bright, but not blinding, about the size of a beach ball. No flicker, no movement. Just hanging there, perfectly still. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't make sense. It wasn't a drone, there was no sound at all, and it wasn't a star or satellite. It was too low and too bright to be anything normal. I stepped out of the tent and walked maybe 10 feet into the clearing. Opal followed, but stayed close to my leg. Her body was stiff. Not scared exactly, but alert, like she was tracking something I couldn't see. I raised my phone to take a picture, but as soon as I opened the camera, the screen glitched out, froze solid, then shut off. Wouldn't turn back on. I tried to restart it, but it was like the battery had been pulled. That's when the light shifted. Still totally silent, it moved. Just a few feet at first, then suddenly zipped sideways across the ridge in a smooth arc. Fast, but not jerky, like it was sliding on rails. Then it stopped again, hovered. That's when it happened. The light flashed. I mean, the orb didn't explode or anything, it just expanded. Like someone had flicked a switch and turned the entire valley into daytime for a second. A full, clean white light lit up every branch, every stone, every leaf. I could see my shadow stretch out sharp on the ground. I could see the grain in the bark on a tree 30 feet away, and then it was gone. Not the orb, everything. Black. Total darkness. It was like my eyes hadn't adjusted yet, but they had. I waved my hand in front of my face, couldn't see a thing. My headlamp wouldn't turn on. Neither would my backup flashlight. Opal pressed against my leg, trembling now. I fumbled my way back to the tent by feel, practically crawling. I couldn't even find the zipper. I just sat against the nylon wall with Opal leaning into me, breathing hard. No sounds, no wind, just blackness. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It felt like an hour, but it could have been 10 minutes. Eventually, a faint blue light started to come back. Moonlight, I guess. And then the sounds followed. Leaves rustling, some frogs down in the creek bed, the normal forest noises. When I finally got the tent open and checked my watch, it was 12:17 a.m. The orb was gone. The weirdest part? My phone was fine. Battery still full, nothing out of place, except the photo app had crashed, and the last recorded time it was opened was 9:48 p.m. There's no way I was out there for over 2 hours. Not without noticing. Next morning, I packed up First Light and headed back toward the main trail. I didn't sleep the rest of the trip. Opal didn't either. Every little noise set her off, ears flat, tail low. I've gone back to Allegheny since then, twice actually, but I've never camped in that spot again, and I've never seen the light. We'd been driving for hours through northern Minnesota, somewhere past Ely, when Amy said, "Hey, pull over, look." We were chasing the northern lights on our first real trip out of the city since everything went sideways with work and life, and it felt like a chance to just breathe. It was around 11 p.m., crisp and cold, just below freezing, with that kind of clear air that makes the stars feel close enough to reach. The road we stopped on was a thin ribbon surrounded by tall pines, their branches black against the night sky. We parked on the shoulder, and Amy jumped out with her coat zipped tight around her neck. She brought our dog, Juno, along. She's a husky mix, and her thick fur was perfect for this cold. The aurora was doing its usual dance, shifting ribbons of green and purple stretching across the horizon. I leaned back against the hood of the car, the cold metal seeping through my jacket, and just watched. But then Amy pointed. "Look at that band," she said. I followed her finger to a section of the lights, a thin, wavering stripe near the center of the display. Unlike the rest of the aurora, which flowed smoothly and seemed random, this band pulsed steadily, like a slow heartbeat. At first, I thought it was some trick of the light or clouds, but the pulse was too regular. Then Amy said something. Just a soft hello, barely audible over the wind. The light changed. The band's glow brightened, pulsing faster and more intensely, almost like it was responding. I blinked, looking from Amy to the sky and back, thinking maybe she was imagining it. Curious, I said, "Hey, can you see that?" I spoke a little louder, and the band pulsed again, almost like it was syncing to our voices. Juno sat down, ears twitching, staring at the sky like she could see something we couldn't. The rest of the aurora kept flowing gently, but that one band seemed locked in some kind of rhythm, pacing itself with every word we spoke. We fell quiet for a moment, just watching. Then Amy whispered, "Try something else." I cleared my throat and said, "Are you there?" The pulse slowed, then sped up, then slowed again, like it was considering the question. Neither of us said anything after that, just watched. The longer we stared, the more the pulsing felt deliberate, like a signal. But there was no pattern I could make sense of. Just this slow ebb and flow, perfectly timed to when we spoke. Then it started to feel like something was watching us back. The wind picked up, rattling the pine needles, and Juno growled low in her throat. Amy reached down to rub behind Juno's ears, but the dog stayed still, focused on the sky. I kept trying to figure it out, whispering little phrases. "Hello? Can you hear us? What do you want?" Each time, the pulse followed. I tried to convince myself it was just a weird natural effect. Maybe some ionosphere thing, or the way the solar particles interacted with the magnetic field. But none of it explained the pulse timing, or the way it seemed to match the volume and rhythm of our voices. We stayed there for almost half an hour, talking softly, watching that pulse. Then a cloud drifted in front of the band, and the light vanished for a moment. When the cloud passed, the aurora had resumed its normal pattern, no pulsing. Amy shivered and said, "Maybe we should get going." On the drive back, the radio kept cutting out and shifting frequencies, which we joked about, but it felt like more than just bad reception. At home, the normal sounds and smells of the city felt distant, like we'd been somewhere else entirely. I kept looking out the window at the sky, half expecting to see that pulsing band again. The strange thing is, when I'm alone and I say something out loud, like, "Are you still there?" Sometimes I swear I see a faint flicker in the corner of my eye. Not the full aurora, but that same pulse just barely there, like it's still listening. I don't know what we saw. I just know it wasn't normal, and it was definitely watching.